Morning.
Yeah, just stick with it for now.
It'll
be fine.
I got these little problems.
Always.
Yeah. Okay, I better find out about Google.
I'm from the U.S.
Maybe
When people say good morning, we say good morning back.
All right.
In case we've never met, I'm the director of teaching and learning for 5 more years. In case you haven't heard, she left the room. Jennifer Thompson will be taking my place starting next Monday. So if you come to for a chance at the very end, so let's just do a quick whip around the room and see who's here and where you're from. So Shannon, let's start.
I am Shannon Ferns. I work here at USBE. I am the elementary mathematics and gifted and talented specialist.
I'm Sean DeMoss, and I work with out-of-state licensing as well as educator.
Adam McMichael, Ogden School District. Gary Ross, Secondary English Language Arts Specialist for Education.
Sid Young, Education Specialist.
Jody Kaufman, Health and PE Specialist here at USBE.
Troy Nordic, I am the driver's ed guy here.
Casey Evans, Very Stella. Ashley Adams, Cash.
Let's come to the back table.
Sarah Whitkey, K-3 Literacy Specialist. Robin Clement, Cash. Olive Hole, Cash.
That's Tamara.
Tamara Burnside, I work with the arts.
Carl Bowman, USBE.
Lonnie Brown's at your request.
Gary Allen, Box Elder School District.
Joey Honey, USBE.
Don Collins, USBE as well.
Christelle Estrada, Federal Programs and Title III Accountability. Casey Evans, Jordan School District.
Andrew Call, Nebo School District.
Russ Hendry, North Summit.
Yourself? I'm not going to call you up yet, so we're just doing introductions. Sorry, scare you out.
Policy Advisor Support.
And walking in, we have Jessica. She's here at USB too, working with preschool. Thank you, everybody. I wanted to start today with something that is called a yellow card activity. And what I'm going to do is pass out what are clearly not yellow cards. The idea is that everybody will write down a question or two, but at the end, we will work on questions somebody else in the room might have the answer. So, for example, it might be something like, does your LEA have a good policy regarding English language? Or what can you do to implement the rule with grade rules? Or, whatever is kind of your mind. We're sitting here at the end of March. There's only a couple of months left of school. You might be wondering about assessments or anything that's coming to your mind. And in this room, there might be somebody that has the answer to. And if you're online, what I'd like you to do is type that into the chat box, and then I'll have Alan write those questions on cards here, and we'll get the questions for the people who are online too. So I'll just give you a minute to formulate a question and write something down. And when you have your question written down, so hold it up, I'll come and gather up the cards. Okay.
I know.
Yes.
I just need to know why. I gravitational force just pulled me.
you guys do? I don't know.
I took a shower.
I said help, and he was like, no.
minutes in.
Yeah, I'm just putting it there.
You're already because people are already being mean. I understand.
I'm
I
pretty
think
sure,
it was the other way around, right?
I'm pretty sure it said like, oh, help. That was my question. She took it.
That's a question from USBE to Ellie. Right on that from USBE. So yeah.
Okay, I don't see anybody else holding up a card. If you think of a question later, go ahead and write it down, and I'll give you one more chance to hand those in right before we do the activity that goes with that at the end. Evidently, our clicker.
I've got one if you need it spread throughout the district.
All right. So it is that time of year that we want to do the legislative wrap up, and today we have with us Jeffrey Van Holden from our Law and Policy section. Us up to speed on what we need, and I'll just turn this over to you, Jeff.
It's good to be here today. Just so any of you know, I am pretty laid back. If you want to cut me off at any point, ask a question, feel free. Caveat being, I don't hear well, so the further back you are, the more I'm going to just see movement of the mouth and not understand the words coming out. So I will try to walk toward you, but try and project toward me. I don't hear very well. We're going to dive right in, though. The promise I'll be as entertaining as I possibly can, because there's nothing more dry to talk about the law and money. But sometimes that can really get you riled up if it's the right issue. So hopefully we will hit all the right points today. We'll keep you awake and invigorated. I'm going to give you some numbers at a glance really fast, because there's nothing more fun than a Monday morning to talk about money and numbers, right? So we're going to start out by looking at some of the numbers, just overall, very high level. So at the first number, you're going to see a 5% increase in overall funding. 1% of that is going to cover your growth for next year. And the rest of that is 4% increase in WTU, which, as far as I've been told, is one of the larger increases we've seen in quite some time for 1 year. So that's great news. We've got the total minimum school program is going to have just about 8.5% more money than it did last year. So that's also great. And the total budget, for anyone who's curious, $5.58 billion for education. Looking a little bit deeper into that, I just wanted to show, sometimes you see a percent, you don't know what that really means. So if we take that 5% increase, add it to what you already get, that is $163,700,000 in ongoing money for education. And there's also $3 million one-time for education as well. For those who have asked, we've had a lot of questions about what is the expected enrollment growth for next year. It's about 6,750 students again next year as well. I'm going to quickly highlight for you in 3 slides some of the areas where there's some funding you might be interested in. We'll start with support funding. So these are all the areas in terms of supports, whether it's teacher salaries or whether it's mental health, other things in relation to that. So we got $4.9 million coming to the salary supplement endorsement program. I will cover what that new money is for in a later slide regarding some amendments that were made to that program. We have a new program that was actually created by Senator Kathleen Reeby, who was a board member for the state board until this year when she switched over to the Senate for the legislature. She created a program to get additional educators into what's called a high needs school. We'll leave that up to the state school board to define what that is, but it's a $500,000 pilot program. We've got $16 million going toward mental health supports. We'll talk more about that. And that's just for this upcoming fiscal year. Future fiscal years, that money is going to be $26 million ongoing. So we're excited about that. There's going to be $5 million for students at risk of academic failure. And then, of course, the biggie one, teacher and student success account. There's at least $65.1 million, all the way up to possibly $99 million, depending on some math and there's a big chunk of change in that account that will be finally distributed this year. We'll talk about that as well. Tech funding, really fast. We're going to talk about computer science grants, $3.15 million. That's one time. We here at the State Board are really excited about this. We got $17 million to revamp our USIMs, or basically the system that your district systems talk to our class about, all of your stuff. A lot of big and so when you guys are reporting, all the stuff that you report and you put into your systems, and then you have to, we've heard you have to, download it and then upload this and change this and that so you can actually talk to our system because they don't talk well. Our system was created back.
Oh gosh, no worries. Your family here. Sorry.
Tech-wise, that is what we call light years in difference. So we're ready to finally get up to speed, be in the 21st century. We've got STEM endorsements that have been moved over here to the State Board of Education. We were given $5 million ongoing. Digital literacy initiative, for Adobe for students, not going for platform as well. Last but not least, we've got some program funding as well, in case any of you are curious about some of these programs. To and from, we got $5 million. Everly tailored students learning. Million. Dual immersion. In the back. We got some cash going to dual immersion. We're excited about that. $500,000 of that going to a pilot project. Interventions for reading difficulties, and then we also have USDB getting some cash as well. So lots of money floating around. Questions so far? The money on a Monday morning feels great, right? So now I'm going to go down through notable bills for this session. I got these categorized in different chunks.
Sorry, who was that?
The guy from Aspire who was going to help you with Aspire.
Oh, shoot. No, I'll take it. Thank you, dear.
Oh,
They always have impeccable timing.
There are people that are remotely with us, so if you're with us remotely,
This is Miriam.
because we're hearing private conversations.
Hi, fine, thanks. So, you ready for our Aspire conundrum?
Yes.
Yes.
That's great.
So when we go in, as when I impersonate the teacher, and she even did it on hers, and we had Teresa Wilson helping us. Her grade book shows certain grades, but when you go to print the elementary report card, it shows different grades. No, that's what I thought I was calling when I called you.
Related. This is going to be fun to see how much I can compete with. We're going to start with
Perfect.
the top, HB 120 and HB 373. So these two House bills were large initiatives.
It's okay. It's CARRIEANN. So Carrie Ann
Positions here
at Moab, MOAB,
running for us to
charter
create
school.
we can push out into the district. Primarily, we're going to have senior positions housed here at the state school. We think that the fairness commitment to the safety This employee is going to
Great.
essentially liaison
All right.
with them as well as several other
Okay. Bye.
officers and the relationship that your district has with local law enforcement. If you have a school resource.
Since they're secure testing materials, and we'll have to keep them locked up.
Yeah, I mean, I would wait. I would have them wait till probably.
Have a shared employee with.
Okay. I'd have them probably wait till Wednesday.
Okay.
I'm digging into a couple of things that we got notified of this morning that are wrong. Wait till Wednesday.
Okay.
Climate surveys and other things related to mental health supports that would be needed. We are also going to try and streamline some of the reporting that is required in relation to school safety violations, interventions that are used to help students, so we can finally have kind of a cohesive picture of what's going on in the districts, what's working, what isn't working, and get those things rolled out into the districts. House Bill 373 is an exciting bill because this one has money for the district. So the first one has money for the state school board. The next one has money for you. So House Bill 373 will provide a grant program that allows school districts to hire what they call qualified personnel. That's defined as a counselor, social workers, school psychologist, or regular psychologist, or school nurse. So the idea being people who are related in some fashion to a mental health support in any way. There's $16 million this year. And then this upcoming fiscal year, so July 1 to June 30th of 2020, we'll have $16 million. And then in July of 2020, we will get $26 million, and that will be the continuing new amount that we'll have to allocate out toward all the districts for these things. You will be required to create a plan, your favorite thing to do, right? More plans, in relation to how you would use this money to hire and create mental health supports for students within the district and the schools. There's a lot of flexibility in this bill. You are allowed to hire, it's not a school-specific employee. You can actually hire somebody who will be assigned to multiple schools. You're allowed to contract out if you don't feel like you are going to be able to use the money to hire an effective employee. If you feel like you could contract out to a private provider, you're allowed to do that as well. You're encouraged to use your local mental health authorities with this money if you want to contract with them for certain services. So there's a lot of room for creativity with these funds. The idea is we really want to make sure we're getting money down to the district and school level that gets that mental health support need met in a better way than it has been before. There's also a little bit of money in this bill that will be going to the Safe UT app. They are going to start building out some new exciting things that we're not ready yet to unveil, but we're excited to announce shortly. So there's some funds in there as well for that. House Bill 393 kind of relates to all of this. You all have, hopefully, you're compliant with the current law that requires you have a suicide prevention program happening in your schools. House Bill 393 will expand the training that is required within that program to include how to adequately deal with students who are higher at risk, especially in relation to sexual orientation. So making sure that there's adequate supports and understanding and training for that particular population. House Bill 208 is Safe Routes to School program. This is a program that actually already existed. It just wasn't in the law. And this is not a program run by us. It is run by the Department of Transportation. So this is a UDOT program. They have some funds that they set aside every year that a nebulous entity applies for. And the bill, unfortunately, does not really specify who applies for this money. I'm going to throw out to you that it is the municipalities in which you live in that will apply for these funds, not the school district. Assuming that is correct, the municipality will apply to UDOT. They can get money to redirect certain routes for schools or build things that will make certain walking routes to schools safer. So, for example, if you've got a route that is fairly close to a school, and then it crosses a very large, dangerous road or whatnot, and you want to make that safer, put in a crosswalk or something else, you could apply and get money you being the municipality could apply and get funds to then. Jody had her hand up.
I can clarify some of that if you like. Okay, so Safe Routes to School is a Utah-run program through the Department of Transportation to improve the safety of students walking to and from school by providing funds for infrastructure, sidewalks, crosswalks, traffic devices, pedestrian education for children. It is funded through the state transportation funds. And then how is it funded? How is it allocated? Cities working with schools in their boundaries identify a problem area, for example, a route that doesn't have a sidewalk that is unsafe for children. They put together an application and send it to the State Department of Transportation. They review it with the traffic studies and make determination on the applications that are most meritorious. So last year in 2018, 31 of the 59 applications were rural and 28 were from urban areas, and 64 were approved in the rural, 64%, and 36% were approved in the urban areas, and that was last year.
Great. So we'll be your city.
And I have a lot of information about that from someone that does government relations, and he was kind of the backer and wanted this bill to go through. So if anyone wants that information, I mean, this is pages long. I am happy to forward it out. But this tells you all about it, how to apply. It's all in this little email that I just grabbed.
Excellent. And to add to that, thank you, Jody.
You're welcome.
The state school board it's required in this bill that the school board here at the state level will be consulted by UDOT in prioritizing which projects should be funded first. So let Jody know if you want your project funded. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't fund them.
House Bill 81 is just one I wanted to make everyone aware of. This one is one of those bills that tells us at the school board level to do something that we kind of already were doing. They just wanted a little more specific. This requires that the school board write administrative rules about what your counselors can and cannot do in terms of how they allocate their time. So we need to now specify and rule what are called direct versus indirect services of a counselor. You might have school counselors that are wearing many hats aside from their regular counselor job. This bill is requiring us to pretty much lay down the law and say, well, the chunk of their time, the vast majority of their time needs to be for their counselor job. And this other chunk, smaller chunk, can be indirect services, so the other hats you have them wear. The legislator, Representative Pulsifer, was getting a lot of complaints in her area that school counselors were saying, well, I'd love to be a counselor, but that's like 10% of what I do today because of everything else the school has me do. So she ran this up. So we'll be updating our rules to kind of delineate the time percentage that counselors can spend on counseling jobs and other jobs. So let's get into the meat of why you are here today, hopefully. We're going to talk a little bit about the curriculum bills. I've got 2 slides on this. Again, keep in mind, we had 574 bills pass this session, so I may not have covered every single one, and you are probably going to be very grateful that I didn't. But if there is one I have not listed, let me know, and we can talk about it. I cannot promise you that I will know the details, but I will do my best. So let's start at the top with Jody. This is another bill that tells us we can do what we were already doing. But essentially clarifies that so that there's no questions. So if you want to talk about condoms, you can do it. You always could in health class, but there was a lot of confusion from a lot of the teachers about whether or not they really could, and there wasn't anything specifically stated in the law, so they were nervous. That was kind of the impetus of this bill. So it really specifies all of the different kinds of contraceptives you can talk about, talks about the fact that you can talk about it, also prohibits you from advocating for their use. So you can be very technical in what you teach. You just can't get very advocacy based in what you're teaching in relation to contraceptives. Did I miss anything? We're feeling good about this bill, Jody? Sure.
It tells teachers they can do what they've always been able to do.
So you now have the backing of the law if there was any ever questions about what that was. Jumping down to House Bill 227, the Utah Computer Science Grant Act. So this bill creates a new curriculum, essentially. The goal of this bill is to get a computer science curriculum in every school. Funny story, and if there are people here who are directly related to or married to legislators, don't tell them you came here and heard what I said today. But I will just say this. If the legislature is running a tax reform bill, and that is the brainchild and baby of the leadership of legislature, you should probably not go up to the Hill and ask for money for computer science and then go and advocate against leadership's tax reform bill. And I will explain why. Things get personal on the Hill, right? Sometimes we set aside data, we set aside practical reasoning, and we just get personal. This bill was originally funded for $7.1 million ongoing. And in the heat of the session was slashed to 3.1 one time. And the reason was industry in particular, the tech industry has really been advocating for this bill. The tech industry, you can imagine, was not super excited about the new tax reform bill that would provide a lot of sales tax on their industry, which is currently not taxed on the sales tax level. So essentially they bit the hand that was going to feed them. And in a nice personal message, this bill received an attack and a slashing of the funds. Why does that matter here? Well, the goal was to put computer science in every school as a curriculum, but we're getting money for 1 year, not ongoing in perpetuity. So it's very difficult to create a long-lasting program with money that you have for 1 year. So we've got some creative solutions we're trying to come up with internally. 3.1 million one time is really not a lot of money when you think about all the school districts in creating a computer science program that's going to be sustainable. So we're probably going to scale this down into more of a pilot program that and take the money and break it up into chunks over 4 years for those participating in the pilot, with the hope that next year, as the session approaches, that the industry and legislative leadership have made up in a wonderful and beautiful way, and that they will be sending more cash to this program so we can actually accomplish what it is. Interesting side note as well, industry has personally committed to matching the money, and any school or LEA that receives money, they are claiming that they will match. There's still some questions around how that will look and if that match is still going to exist now that the legislature kind of gave them the middle finger for opposing the tax bill. So lots of things up in the air currently. Got a little personal. Hopefully that wasn't too offensive, but it's always fun to kind of understand some of the things going on behind the scenes. House Bill 286, another curriculum that is required for all schools, right, is financial and economic literacy education. So only a couple things happened to this bill. What got amended was this program was audited, by the way, by the state auditor, John Dougal. And one of the findings he had was didn't feel like economics was stressed as much as finance. And so this bill does essentially that. It adds in a requirement that not only are we teaching finance, but you need to be teaching economic systems as well. It delineates different types of government and government structures and economic systems. So that's kind of the direction they want you to go, show how communism might work versus capitalism and democracy and how this all ties together. One nice thing this bill does is it brings us up to speed also with one thing we weren't doing, which was the student passport. This program did require, which is something we never got rolling out, but it did require that students, as they were moving through K through 12 and learning different elements of finance and economic literacy, that they had like an actual physical passport that was being stamped. That's like, yes, you have now learned how to balance a checkbook, and yes, you've now learned how to save money. Obviously, that never really got off the ground, and so the legislature very kindly let us get rid of that requirement so that we were not breaking the law, which is always good. So that's the other thing that this bill does. We don't have the passport requirement anymore. So hopefully none of you were doing that, because you don't have to anymore. And then, of course, a big shout out to the back table. We've got Senate Bill 173 with dual language immersion amendments. I presented on Friday to the PR directors for all the districts, and this bill actually took a lot of time. They had lots of feelings about this bill, which was not, for that audience, not the bill I expected any questions on. So it was really interesting. But just so people are aware, there's a pilot program this bill creates, and of course, Carl, if I screw this up, just let me know.
Sure.
You can cut me off at any point.
Sure.
The idea being Senator Andrade, who very openly stated these things in public meetings, so I don't go back repeating what he said. He has some children in his family that did not get into immersion programs at the stage you enter in. He would like them to get into immersion programs. They're in 5th and 6th grade. So this is a pilot program to essentially look at, is it possible to get children at a later age into dual immersion using online platforms and whatnot. He has openly stated he is very interested in running this strictly as a pilot, and in a year from now, if this didn't work, or when we report, I don't think it's quite a year from now, it's 4 years from now, we will just get rid of this program, or if it does work, we will expand it. So just be aware of this on the horizon. Carl and his team will be working on the selection process for schools to participate in this pilot. So if you're interested, make sure you connect with Carl on that. You'll get some cash and some guidelines, hopefully, right, Carl? And then you will roll out a pilot for students to enter into dual immersion later. Any questions so far? Have I put any of you to sleep? I know it's early. I don't see any phones out yet, so that's good. You're not texting your significant other. That's good. We'll start in the middle on this one. Senate Bill 198, Human Trafficking Prevention Training. This one was fun. Actually, we were sitting up in committee. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on. There was a couple bills about this. And Diana was with me and Jody was with me. And we did like the draw the short straw game at the very last minute. And I drew the short straw, so I got to go testify to the committee. And the legislator, Senator Weiler, was very willing to work with us. He was going to create a requirement to make human trafficking prevention part of the health curriculum. And we had to quickly redirect that. We're like, health seems great, but that's a short period of time to put a lot of stuff in that's already there, and now you want to add one more thing. Let's redirect this somewhere else. So we got it redirected to be an element of the child sexual abuse prevention training that is required by every school to be given once every other year. This will be now a component of that training that you have to give. So whoever the qualified personnel in your school or district is, give that training. You should let them know they have a new thing that they get to do as well. We will jump down to House Bill 146, concurrent enrollment amendments. We've got two bills today about concurrent enrollment. This is the first one. And this is the less controversial one. Well, actually, I guess it depends on who you are. I assume this is less controversial. This one just expands and clarifies grades 9 through 12 can sign up for concurrent enrollment, not just 11 and 12. So if any of you had a very limited population on who you were allowing, this now requires 9 through 12 to be allowed. And we'll jump up to House Bill 118, incentives for statewide assessment. You may love this, you may hate this. It depends on how you feel about statewide assessment. This one is a direct response to the opt-out law. So for those who are unfamiliar, and I would assume actually everyone here is probably familiar with the opt-out provisions of statewide assessment. If parents don't want their kids to take the statewide assessment, they legally can opt them out currently. This is kind of the opposite of that. This allows parents to opt their student into being able to use their score on the statewide assessment test to count toward their grades in any given area. So say, for example, science, if a student wants to opt into using their statewide performance, their statewide assessment score on science, in their science course, the teacher, of course, has control, could allow that student to use that score to replace a test they didn't do well on. So this is essentially giving students and teachers the ability to incentivize taking the statewide assessment test, because now you can actually, or at least taking it seriously, because if you do well, you could opt into using that to bump up your grade in any given course. So that will actually take effect May 14th. Not in time for this year, but in time for next year. Any questions on that? We're going to move on to the next big topic, employment. And I'm going until 9:45.
Go as long as you need.
Good.
Yes, that's. Yeah.
So we're now going to go into some teacher employment bills. I will start with, I'll try and work my way backwards from the easiest to probably the one that will get the most conversation. So I'm going to start with House Bill 375 up here in the middle, school employee background checks. This is a huge win. This is actually one of those moments where you want to stand up and clap for the legislature and be like, you did something logical. I'm really happy about this. Right now, the current law requires that if you have a pre-K program in your district, the teachers teaching in the pre-K program, as well as other employees, are subject to a background check required by the Department of Health, I believe. This bill says, well, if you're already in a district and you had to go through the regular background check process, we don't require that you have to have a second identical background check. That if you didn't do, you would get a $5,000 a day fine until you do the background check. Actually, the Department of Health had recently issued some warnings to some districts saying we're fining you $5,000 a day because these pre-K teachers didn't get our background check. They just got a more thorough background check from your school district. So this bill just basically says one's enough.
And they
so
took
we're
4
happy
years
about
to
this
decide to act on that bill.
Yes.
They took 4 years to actually act on that bill, and then woo! Yeah, red flags went up real fast.
You gotta love that, right?
Yeah,
as soon as you start saying, we're gonna fine you money, people are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's revisit. So we're excited about this bill. It's one of those moments where we got some logic out of the session. Not that they're not always illogical. House Bill 130, the next one, exit survey. This now requires that, this requires the availability of an exit survey when teachers leave the district or charter. When they decide to terminate their employment, the idea here is the legislature is wanting to gather data that can inform future policy on retention, like what would actually work on retention. So we at the state school board are required to create the survey, and then it is an optional survey for teachers as they leave. We would definitely put out to you all to encourage teachers to take this because, as I said, the idea is to look at the data in the future and use this to inform policy. So we would like some good data coming our way on why are teachers leaving so that we can really help the legislature come up with the right formula in getting teachers to stay. Next, I'll jump over to House Bill 291. This is the other concurrent enrollment bill, the one that I actually felt was a little more controversial than expanding access. This one has to do with who can teach concurrent enrollment. I think, again, this depends on how you feel. There are arguments on both sides of this issue, but this bill will now require that, and it does make a bifurcation between CTE concurrent enrollment and all other concurrent enrollment. But let's start with all other. If it's not a CTE related course, this bill would require that the teacher have a master's degree in the area that they are teaching in order to be allowed to teach it. The reason why this sparks some controversy is there's questions about does this limit the availability of qualified teachers to teach the course, limiting the number of courses, limiting the number of access. The flip side to that argument, this increases quality. The process outlined in the bill is that the district will have to apply to the institution that you get your authority from for concurrent enrollment. You have to basically apply and say, please allow these teachers to teach concurrent enrollment. If they do not have a master's degree, do not fear. You are allowed to show an alternative saying, well, no, they don't have a master's, but they do have extensive experience. Here's why you should allow them to teach anyway. And the higher ed institution will be allowed to grant them the ability to teach CE courses, even if they don't have the master's degree. But the decision making is exclusively with the institution that will give that authorization. The State Board of Regents is going to be required by this bill to create an appeals process. So if your teacher gets denied because they don't have a master's degree, they didn't like the qualifications, you could appeal to the Board of Regents and still hopefully get them in. I do not know what the appeals process will look like. I don't think the Board of Regents yet. The reason why we bifurcate this between all others and CTE, if this is a CTE course, master's degree, or the qualifying certifications that would be required for that given academic area. So if it's like computer science, it may not have to be a master's in that. It could be all of the certifications that are available for computer science. Let's jump over to House Bill 236, Teacher Salary Supplement Amendments. This is the program, for those who don't recall, that gives math, science, special ed teachers a salary bump of $4,100. This adds a new element to that. There was a lot of criticism that the requirement in the program is strictly for those who have the bachelor's degree for the area they are teaching. And there are a lot of times where they might have a bachelor's degree in an unrelated area, but then get endorsements in, say, special ed, and then start teaching in special ed, but they can't get the salary bump because their degree wasn't in special ed. So this expands who can qualify for the salary bump to those who have also received the endorsements, but may not have the bachelor's or related degree to that academic area. Huge caveat, though. If you get the endorsement, so say you are an English major, you got an English degree, but you got endorsements in special ed, you're now teaching in special ed, to get that $4,100 bump, you have to teach special ed for 10 years in a public school before you can get it. So this is, and the huge reason why,
You've been teaching it for 10 years.
was because the fiscal note of this bill would have been a lot larger if we just said anyone who has an endorsement first year or 10 years or 20 years into teaching. They'd actually run some numbers, and I believe it was somewhere around $17 million originally would have been needed to fund this if we just allowed anyone with an endorsement. So they decided to narrow it down to those who have been teaching for 10 or more years in that area, so that it would be $4.9 million, and it did get funded. So the legislature does have a tendency and a habit to work incrementally. So we're hoping that this is just step one, and then they'll give more money later, and we can kind of broaden who falls into this. That's where they started. So that leaves us with the biggie in the room, the teacher and student success account. I heard rumors that some of you were very interested in this bill. I will do my best to break it down for you. There have been a lot of myths and rumors flying around this bill that are not true. The first that I will dispel immediately is your school's performance will not be tied to getting the money. A lot of people have been very, very concerned that this ties performance to the statewide assessment and accountability system to whether or not the school actually gets the funds. That is incorrect. There are requirements for schools to show improvement through the accountability system, but that if you do not improve, your money is not tied to that metric. Essentially what this does is it's a huge pot of money. For those who don't remember, Our Schools Now initiative set aside some cash saying we want teachers to make more money, and we're going to wait on how we do that as soon as we see how voters vote on the gas tax, and we all know how that went, not very well. Don't raise my gas tax for teachers. So in response to that, they have now created this program to get the money out, because the cash has been sitting there for at least a year. They gave some more money to it, and you no longer have school improvement plans. This bill got rid of that whole area of code. You don't do those anymore. But you will do a different plan. So it'll kind of change a little. So you'll now have the Teacher and Student Success Act plan that you have to create. That is created by the principal, not by the school community council. So that is different. However, the principal is required to consult with the school community council, the teachers at the school level, parents within the school, and they may consult with any other stakeholders, including the students. The district, so at the district level, they will create a model plan. The school's plan has to align with the district's model. There are certain elements in this bill that show exactly what the district has to include in their plan. It's all about student achievement through many different means, including, do we need more money for mental support so that teachers can focus on teaching, whatever it may be, but it's all centered around student achievement. The LEAs at the LEA governing level, so charter school board level or local board level, will create these models. Schools will align their plan, individual plans with these models. And we at the school board will distribute money from this account. Essentially, it's going to be more complicated than this, but the very high level is the bulk of the money will go out based on the percentage of WPU that you have in your LEA. So if you've got, versus the statewide, right? So you'll get that proportionate amount, essentially, out of the account. There's some caveats to that we probably don't have time to get into, also because there's some rulemaking the board has to do, and we're making some decisions currently about some of these other caveats. But essentially, you'll get a proportionate amount of this money, and you're supposed to use it to implement the plan that you have. A new requirement in this bill also takes your school trust land plan and says, this is the big umbrella plan. Your school trust land plan now needs to accomplish a piece of your big Teacher, Student, and Success Act plan. So essentially, you could, you've got the big umbrella plan written, and you could take a chunk of it and say the school trust land creates the piece you're going to find. So the hope and the goal of this, yes.
Is that more prescriptive than trust land planning has been in the past?
Yes and no. I think it depends on what you have done personally with your school trust land plan. Those have always been required by statute to be for student academic achievement. No doubt, as you can imagine, some schools have gotten very creative at stretching and pushing the envelope as to what that is and what that means. That piece of code did not change. So your school trust land plan will still need to be centered around student academic achievement as it always was. The idea, though, is that is something that is a small component of this larger plan that you have. Part of the reasoning being when we had school improvement plans, people sometimes were just doing two separate things, not necessarily making sure that school improvement and school trust land plans were aligning and kind of accomplishing overall goals. And so Senator Milner was particularly interested in making sure that your umbrella plan and your school trust land plan are all heading in the same direction. And so you're now directed to make sure that the umbrella plan, piece of it is your school trust land plan. The idea, though, is it shouldn't change what you were already doing, because all of this is supposed to be toward academic achievement and that answer your question? The legal requirements for trust land plans have not changed at all. Those will be the same.
Well, in the past, a principal, quote unquote, could not tell the trust lands committee what to do. There's criteria, but it's the parents, the teachers planning, the principal is sitting at the table, but he can't direct anything. All of a sudden, this sounds like the principal can be a little bit more involved because the principal's plan, this teacher student success plan, is the overarching plan. I actually think that the school improvement plan could be bigger than that if you want to talk about physical plant improvements and other things, playground improvement, which doesn't fit into any of this, right?
Correct. And you are correct on that. It does essentially place the principal in a more consultative role on the school trust land plan that you passed. But that is also why the principal here is required to consult with the school community council on the broad plan. Make sure everyone's getting on the same page for both plans. And you also brought up a great point, just so everyone knows, the funding here cannot be used for capital improvements whatsoever, if there was any question. So no capital improvements. It's all about academic achievements. And I did want to highlight essentially what the money can and cannot be used for. There was also a myth out there that this is 100% for teacher salaries. That would be awesome, but that is not true. This bill actually has some caps in it. The general cap is, so every school district will get or charter will get their proportionate amount of their WPU that they have. They can only use 25% of that amount for direct salary increases. There is a caveat. You can do up to 40% of that amount for direct salary increases if your teacher salary average for your district is below the state salary average. And I have these listed here. So I was going to try really hard to be the waiter that remembered your order, but I didn't. So let's see. So the big if you want the 40% instead of the 25% to go straight to salary increases, your local board has to have maxed out the local board levy that it can. So essentially in statute, your local boards can raise property tax up to a certain amount. They have to have hit the cap of that amount before you can use the 40%. Or If they haven't capped it out, they have to increase the property tax by 0.0001, which is 1/100,000th of a percent, I think. I can't remember. 1/10,000th of a percent. And if they raise it, then they also have to be below the state average. But if your local board has already maxed out their property tax amount they can have, they can use the 40% if they can show below average teacher salary. Another caveat to that, if you're in the county of a 4th, 5th, or 6th class, so we're looking at the rural schools, you will also be allowed, just flat out allowed, to use 40% toward teacher salaries.
Do you have any more information in terms of when you say below the state average, the average of step 1 leg 1, the average of all teachers, the average of what?
So the bill requires that the state board will set the state average. So to be determined, but we'll be taking essentially the average salary of teachers statewide. The board has to come up with the formula of how they're determining that, and that will be coming out shortly. So then, as the chunk of money goes to the district, the chunk of the district money going to the schools is the same, right? Every school will get a piece of the district's chunk based on their proportionate amount of students within the school. And schools, principals can use 5% of the money they get at the school level to directly give salary raises to teachers. And it says school personnel in the bill, and that's defined as teachers. Hopefully I haven't confused you, yes.
Just a couple questions. When is the plan due, and is that going to be through Utah grants or?
Great question. So the plan actually has to be approved. So the LEAs have to have their plan approved by the state board, and then the schools have to have their plans approved by the local board by June 30th of each year. So the state board will be required to approve plans before that. Otherwise, there's nothing for the school districts to, or the schools to inform their writing, right? So then the schools will then have to apply by June 30th and get approval from the local board. And the local board is required in this bill to approve all the school level plans in a local board public meeting. They can't do this behind the scenes administratively. This is required to go through a public process. So, yes.
So, online question, could the TSSA plan be a 90-day school plan?
What's that?
Could the TSSA plan be a 90-day school plan?
Is it a 90-day school plan?
Yeah, I'd say could it be?
I am not sure I understand the question. If you can get clarity on me, whoever asked that question, I'm looking up to the ceiling like your voice from heaven. I don't know what you mean, but there is nothing within the bill that references 90 days. So if there's something else out there about 90-day plans, I'm not really sure I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, it's not in, this would be the full year.
It would be a full academic year.
It's about accountability, and so you would have your accountability metric until the end of the year. So you might have 90-day plans of how you're going to achieve that, but that would be a local decision. This is just saying you have a plan. So the urgency here is your district or charter needs to come up with their success framework, or your principals can't write their plan towards the success framework.
Got criteria for that?
It's very, I think it's vague in the bill of what that looks like.
So just read the bill then, or are you
At
guys
this point,
interpreting
inviting
it
us to
narrower than that or broader?
Yeah, it is that big, and there's no like staffing at USBE that's attached to this. So in terms of technical assistance, we are meeting tomorrow to try and come up with some guidance for the LEAs, but it's honestly because there's not a whole lot here. Your board submits their success framework, and that's to us. That will be through Utah grants is what we're thinking. That will kind of trigger your money. So once you've submitted that plan, we have no rights to tell you that plan is not good or it's great. We just take it and we give you money. It's just a contingency point, but your local schools are supposed to be writing towards your success plan. And many of you have what you do, what is our, LEA kind of already spelled out. It's just taking that and having them articulate how is the work you're going to do to help us to achieve our district or charter plan. So there's a lot of, I think, vagueness, I would say, in this one, and I think continued refinement will happen in the next couple of years as people try and implement TSSA. Just know we're all in the same boat. People are like, do you have samples? Nope. As soon as somebody sends me one, I'll be happy to share.
So there's some challenges in terms of, trust land plans are due
early.
April. Earlier. And so if we're trying to get those coordinated, at
I
least
think,
in the
I
first
think
round,
this year
this
you're
is
probably going to have a
little
real
bit-
struggle to do that. Next year will be much easier when the timing. Anytime we have legislation that comes in March that you're supposed to enact, it's difficult. But people want the dollars, right? We don't hold on. This is 65, maybe 99 million. Schools are super excited. You've probably been stirring about it yourselves as curriculum directors. I know I've gotten a lot of text messages about it. People are like, what is this? And okay, if we do this, yeah. So as you need clarity, feel free to reach out. I've been working on this bill, so I have some background. Trying with the draft. I mean, initially when it came out, they wanted a school improvement plan, a TSSA, and school land trust. And we came and said, hey, this seems like a school improvement plan. Can we wash the school improvement plan and turn it into this? So that was one, I think, win. Ultimately, your principals have enough plans. Another thing it does is it does remove the requirement to have a reading plan at the local school level. So we asked for that to be removed as part of this. We're really trying to reduce the burden on your schools. It's in the very last lines of this bill that it repeals the reading plan that's required at the school level. You still have your early literacy program plan at the district level, but the schools no longer have to write their reading plan as part of this bill as well. But I think some examples of success frameworks, if you guys come up with some, feel free to send them our way and we'll distribute. Some of you already have these things established. A lot of it will be easy that way, and others will be like, what is our big goal?
Truthfully, how much different can it be than from the trust land guidelines already?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you look at this bill, it could really just say school accountability report card. Those are what we're really working towards, because that's what this one's all about. How are you going to improve your outcomes on those accountability pieces? So whether that's your bottom 25%, your English learners, your reading, math, or science areas, it can be pretty open. I mean, we joke and say you can hand in a Post-it and call it good. Like, there's nothing in this bill we regulate, so it's very open of what that looks like. But you want to give your schools guidance so that you get good stuff coming out of them. This is a lot of money to go poorly. So I think it's that balance of what can we do to make this work to what gets us what we need at the same time. It's a good struggle.
And that was the key thing I want to probably close with. Jennifer kind of highlighted, this really is going to be the schools working with the local boards. This bill empowers the local boards with this money. The state board's only role is to provide a couple definitions, like what is average statewide salary, and then we are required to just, by formula that's already listed out, just kick the money to the school districts, and it's all about the school districts deciding how the money is spent and keeping the schools within their district accountable about how they spend their piece of that money. There is no grand model plan that we can provide at the state level, because every school district is going to be kind of the highest point where that gets created. So work with your district, think through who in your district is going to be the chosen person who gets this awesome responsibility to create these plans. Yes?
You know when those allocations will be sent out so we get an idea of what we're writing for?
So this bill had no effective date written in it, which means it's automatically the law on May 14th of this year. So the money becomes available July 1st.
So in terms of, I think you're asking how much.
Planning. Well, the planning to write the
We're working on
plan.
the numbers tomorrow in terms of how the formula works out, and so I would expect in the next week you should have counts, and then you have to distribute down to the school level based on student population, but you at least will know your amount for your LEA.
For the district.
Within the next week. I mean, they're supposed to get that done pretty quick. I think the board wants to weigh in a little bit, but the board really has no ability to change the formula. The formula is pretty prescriptive, I think, in the bill. Would you agree? So we anticipate getting that out. We were supposed to meet Friday, but school counselor bill took a lot longer.
So will this allocation be sent to curriculum directors or to our BA or?
BAs, I would expect, but if I get a copy, we can get it out to you guys as well, because you're really the ones that are gonna make this happen. So we could share it. Yes, this one I figured would be a hot topic.
And I want to make sure that Christelle gets all the time she needs. I'm going to wrap up, but if you have other questions for me, we could have talked for days about what happened at the session. But this is my contact info. If you want to jot that down, feel free to email or call me. Email is by far the best way to contact me. And I'd be happy to walk you through any bill or talk about a bill we didn't cover. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
award you to tiers.
Is expected the TSSA plan will be due June 30th, 2019 or 2020?
Well, to the person who asked that question, great question. We get money this year. So if you want money this year, you should probably have a plan by June 30th that has been approved by your local board. So this is part of the reason why we're trying to talk about this bill at every legislative wrap-up that we have is you've got to get someone in your district on this immediately. And again, we at the state board are given very little oversight of this bill, so we will not be providing a model plan. Just keep in mind your school improvement plans serve as a great starting resource. We don't have what they are. But you will want to get those plans done and approved by June 30th of this year. So you've got a few months.
Yeah, this is a turn and burn, friends. Welcome to Totally. This is what we do all the time with programs. And this, you guys know this.
Okay, thank you. I cut off Jeff's applause. Let's do that again. Much appreciate that. And he is a great resource. If you do have questions now, you have his contact information, and he spent the 45 days up at the legislature and really knows a lot of what the intent was and thought through some of the challenges that might be associated. So please use Jeff as a resource. He is here for you. So the next thing that we wanted to talk about is EL school accountability. Over the past year, Christelle Estrada, our specialist, has been conducting visits to schools and looking at classrooms and instruction and how English learners are being provided access to the core standards in their classrooms. And because we've been doing that as part of a overall, our specialists have been going along. We've actually observed a lot of things about instruction in general. And so I wanted Christelle to come and take you through some of the things today, because quite frankly, when I went on the visits, I wasn't seeing good instruction. And I came back to Christelle and said, I'm really concerned. Christelle sent me to secondary math classrooms because that was my background when I was teaching. And what I saw was 95% teacher talk, sometimes even more than 95% teacher talk, very little student engagement in math. By the time somebody is in high school, you would think that the students could be working together and talking together about mathematics, and that isn't what I saw. And I was so concerned about what I saw that I asked Christelle to come and speak to all of you about some of these issues. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Christelle. Don't worry about the time. You've got your full half hour.
Thanks, Diana. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Okay, I have some key people in the audience that I'm going to ask to participate in a specific way, because when, and this is actually Park City, so I'll give a shout out to Tracy. Before ESSA even passed, Park City said, come and look at our classrooms and observe, because we're making this big switch instead of having pull out. And this idea that, every single kid who is an English learner needs serious interventions. We're going to do something different, and we're going to be inclusive. And the concept that Park City was saying is, all of our English learners are all of our students. It's not somebody else's issue that we're going to send them out to another classroom or a parapro or whatever, right? So thanks to Park City and Tracy, she was a middle school principal, and then feedback from peer reviewers for the ESSA plan. Their question was, so how is the state agency actually going to support and ensure that English learners have access to grade level content? Are you doing that? So the question is, based on the feedback that we got from the ESSA plan, and now that Title III accountability is now in Title I. So how many of you have Title I schools? How many of you have schools with just 10 English learners? Okay, so 10 English learners is the N size for state accountability as well. And the thing that's really, I want you to think about this as a strategic opportunity. So this is an opportunity to change the way in which instruction happens. We also saw in some schools some of the best instruction I've ever seen in my entire life. You don't actually need to go to Finland. If you want a nice trip, you can. You don't really need to go there. You don't need to go to California and look at their curriculum outlines. You don't need to go to Texas and see what they're doing. You have some exemplary teachers that if those practices were acknowledged, credit to, disseminated, you'd have entire schools on school report cards being commendable. One such example is Backman Elementary. If you want to see some great instruction, specifically in mathematics, you'll see an elementary school in Salt Lake that's now going to be a lab school at the University of Utah because of the way in which the principal has organized instruction and changed the culture of the school in relationship to outcomes for English learners. We saw amazing work being done with refugee students at the AVID program at a junior high. And they're actually, so Granite Park Junior High is also doing this really interesting brand new program for long-term English learners related to the AVID method. I saw some of the best math instruction for a classroom full of refugee students. Might have been different languages. It was like spectacular. So the reason I'm saying these things is that you build on your successes when you have someone identify what's really making a difference. So if you have one fourth grade teacher who is a rock star in mathematics, so how come like the whole school, why aren't they rock stars in mathematics or in English language arts or in science? Recently at Uinta, I saw the most, and also in a Davis Title I school, I saw the best science instruction in the fourth grade ever. There are even students who are going to actually, in the final report, get commendations because of the kinds of questions they asked. Students were the ones who were asking the questions. So I'm starting this off to say we should think about this as a strategic opportunity. Because as you all know, targeted school improvement identified 330 schools, among which a student group has not made progress in 2 years, have stayed in the lowest 5% for academic achievement. Okay, so I know where everybody's heart is, and we don't want that. Of those 330 schools, 293 were identified for English learners. Almost a third of every single school. So now what are we going to do about it? So the monitoring visits have been redesigned to really, across the agency, develop, and also if you wanted to come with me as a peer reviewer, you come with me as a peer reviewer and we go visit classrooms. So what I've put in your folder is the actual tool that we use for observations, which is pretty amazing because this is Kathy Writing in Majestic with Jordan. She actually took this and they used it, and also I think Joel Jensen, they used this to give quality feedback to teachers based on their observations. So they're using tools that we're developing so that the kind of feedback that's valuable for teachers to adjust their instruction can be done in a way in which it's not, I'm going to walk into a classroom and see how many initiatives that you've implemented, and if there's 30 minutes of fidelity on this computer program. If you've done that, I'll check it off. Okay, it's not that idea. It's the idea of really paying attention to the way in which the culture of the classroom creates an opportunity for increased student talk. You can't have kids becoming English proficient within 5 years. That's what the ESSA law is suggesting. And access to academic language in the content areas, so they have access to grade level content in mathematics, science, and English language arts, if no one's giving anybody the kind of feedback that's making a difference in a safe environment where kids really excel. So I have that for you. And the other thing I have for you is something that we're going to interact with. So, and I have 2 corrections. So if you take this out, so you actually have the observation tool, and then you have a summary of some of the findings across the 10 LEAs that we visit. Does everyone have the sheet out? This correction is really important. So how many of you know which schools have been identified in your district for targeted school improvement? Raise your hand higher. So there's a link here so you can actually, that's the other piece. It's very, very important that you actually identify, because TSI, we don't provide any technical assistance. It's based on federal law in relationship to all schools in Utah, all public schools. So here's the correction. The correction is where it says 330 schools are identified as having 1 or more student groups achieving in the lowest 5% for 2 consecutive years. Okay, so that's a third of the schools in Utah. Of those 330, 293 have been identified for the EL student group. That means 20 high schools, 49 middle schools, 124 elementary schools. Now here's the exit criteria. You have to make these additions because they're on today. And I got this from from the school improvement team upstairs. For 2 consecutive years, the school no longer has, you have to put in the identified student group. The identified student group performing below the percentage of points associated with the lowest performing 5% of all schools. Cross out Title I. Of all schools in the state's accountability system. It's not about Title I. It's about all schools. Okay, so here's the reasoning in relationship to the way the monitoring visits have changed. So I don't know if you're familiar, some of you might be familiar, that previously monitoring visits, people come, they go to the district office and they look at files. Oh, and then they look at funding. Okay, so no, that's really not going to help. I mean, that doesn't really help in relationship to what's going on in classrooms, right? And getting kind of an objective view based on observations for a specific purpose. So if you look at the part of the ESSA plan, it says, this is the question we have to answer. Does the state agency describe how it will assist eligible entities in meeting the state design, it's supposed to be designated, design long-term goal for English language proficiency? So it's the extent to which English learners come into our system and they become proficient in English based on the WIDA assessment of a 5.0, which is a composite score in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Got it? That's our state designated criteria for determining English proficiency. I have another friend back there, so she's going to, Annalise Rubin from Alpine, she's going to jump in too. Now it says, does the SEA describe how it will assist eligible entities, that means you all, in helping to ensure that English learners meet challenging state academic standards? Academic standards means mathematics, science, and English language arts. Based on our accountability system. It's now aligned, federal and state are aligned. That's where your state report cards came from, right? Okay, so guess what the two reviewers said? They said, no, Utah hasn't done that. You didn't describe it. You didn't describe how you were going to work with LEAs to support access to grade level content. So what are you going to do about it? So it says, provide a description of the supports available for LEAs in schools to provide academic content and instruction in English language arts, mathematics, and science to ensure that English language learners meet challenging state academic standards. The state must provide date for a long-term goal. The long-term goal was exhibited as a 5-year trajectory based on the law and based on where the students as English learners enter into our system, at what grade level and what proficiency level. So every single student has an individual growth goal, which makes sense because if someone's coming in as a refugee, is coming in at the 9th grade with interrupted formal education and we expect the kid to graduate, it doesn't make sense. So all of those goals are really differentiated, which is a good thing for us. I mean, it shows that we're really taking into consideration the way in which students have access, equitable access to grade level content. We're not looking at pull-out programs with software interventions. We're not looking at that. We're looking at what happens in Tier 1 instruction. That's the thing that's really important in mathematics and science and English language arts. Okay, so what we said we would do is we would actually get a team across the agency. And so I dragged my colleagues from teaching assessment, special ed. So everybody in the agency ends up spending some time going to a school with this observation tool, making commendations for specific teachers, and then making generalized recommendations for that school. That report is analyzed and sent to districts, and then it's uploaded into the grants management system. Think about it. Now when the feds or the state auditors come to you and they say, oh, so, where's your evidence for what you've been doing working with English learners? How's that impacting your new plan? So you realize I'm giving you everything that you need to actually develop a new plan. Right? Okay. So here's the technical assistance through monitoring. Content specialist from the SCA in mathematics, English language arts, and science. I'm on the back page and I highlighted it. To provide supports for quality instruction and meeting the state's grade level academic content standards. Monitoring visits, priority scheduling based on LEAs not meeting annual growth targets in English language proficiency, and end of level academic assessments for challenging state standards that include commendations and findings and recommendations, and then in response to the findings, it will also be uploaded into the Utah Grants Management System. So far, we've done Granite, Salt Lake, that's a list. Here's the thing. We go to a district and say, well, why don't you identify the feeder pattern, especially in a place like Granite that's like huge, or Alpine. So we're going to go visit Alpine in September. So the goal is to create this leveraged opportunity for an LEA to identify a feeder pattern in relationship to the kind of feedback that might be helpful for them to realign resources, organize improvement plans, and then respond to them in a very public way in relationship to the Utah Grants Management System. Because then it's like an electronic portfolio. You have everything there, right? You have how you're using your funds, you have your budget narrative, you have your self-assessment tool that is a part of the application for funding. You have an application that helps you look at the data that you need to assess the work that you're doing, how you should allocate funds related to student outcomes, not related to a new football field. So we're trying to leverage this opportunity, make it systemic, create an electronic platform where we're all together. It's not we're not waiting for someone to tell us how to do that. So, and some of the people who are shaking their heads have already had this experience. I don't think it's been that painful. Tiffany, has it been
Personally, no, actually, it was really helpful. It was delightful.
It was really an awful experience. I don't think anybody else is in here. Is Granite? But Annalise was she was a peer reviewer. You want to say something about being a peer reviewer? Annalise?
Oh, I just appreciated the opportunity, mainly because I could see firsthand into going into classrooms, looking at the specific practices that need to be in place, or if they're not in place, then an opportunity to provide feedback and make adjustments, the necessary adjustments. And then it prepares me for September.
Yeah, David, do you want to say anything about your visiting classrooms for mathematics? And David's been a gem. He's gone to middle schools and elementary schools. Do you want to say anything? Diana's already kind of said something about her experience.
Yeah, so I visited, like Christelle said, I visited elementary schools and junior highs, and my experiences have been like Diana. The instruction I've seen has been mostly teacher led, and not a whole lot of student interaction, and not a lot of student understanding of what's going on. So, and I put all those things into my reports, and I have pretty high standards for math instruction. I wasn't looking at my highest standards for math instruction. I was trying to find a middle ground where I could at least see some things that indicate really good math instruction, specifically discourse and students talking with each other and doing problem solving and those kind of things. And that was lacking in most places where I went.
So I'm giving you a sample of this idea of collaboration that's strategic across an entire agency. So we're in federal programs. Title III is now in Title I. We have all these amazing content specialists that we value. And so we have this really great opportunity to provide the kind of feedback that would actually make a difference for districts in looking at policy issues that we'll get to in a minute. Jolie, do you want to say anything? And Kathy? So Kathy?
So my experience was similar. I did English language arts and saw lots of just routine, go through the motions of holding class. Two really excellent instructional models in the school that I saw, and the others really lacking to the point that classroom management completely interfered with my ability to evaluate the instruction because there was so much other stuff going on.
I a little bit echoing what David said, but this was also tying into, we also had the New Teacher Project come and talk about the opportunity myth to us a week or so ago. And one of the things that really stood out to me is talking about in all core content areas, they visited over 900 classrooms. And out of those 900 classrooms, only about 250-ish of them were doing content that was on grade level. Like through all of their observations and so and this was not just specific EL, this was all core classrooms. And then also of the 900 classroom, only 74 of them had students doing the thinking. And the reason I bring that up in this conversation is because in my experience of going and looking, what I was really looking for was teachers posing questions and opportunities for students to think and respond. And like Diana said, it's like, in one of the, well, not one, but in, I'll share the other one, in the one that was I thought was really good. But in the classrooms that I was experiencing where 95% of the conversation was coming from teachers, a lot of times the 5% where students were talking were choral response, below grade level responses. Yeah. So like being in a high school and the question was asked, and I want to be careful how I say this because I know that teachers work so hard, but the questions asked were like 5th grade level for students to respond to. So even though the content in the room was, here's what we're doing in a high school classroom, what the students were being asked was way below grade level. But I did also have experiences where teachers were posing a problem and students were thinking about it and then sharing strategies and talking about it and going through that. And it's like how to help people understand that when you are talking about listening, speaking, reading, and writing, that it also includes thinking. So just spending a little bit of time of like, what am I going to ask my students so that those things are in place, really made a difference. And I just wanted to say too how much I appreciate you giving the opportunity to be using a document like this to go out and capture bright spots and thinking about ways that we can take that number of 74, because the new teacher project was not in Utah classrooms, it was in classrooms around the nation, but also they really highlighted and pointed out that those 900 classrooms were the ones that they were invited into. So didn't even include ones that said thanks but no thanks. So just, thinking about the work that we have that is important. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, my point is, if we're all learning together, then we shouldn't be afraid of the kind of feedback that would help us see more clearly how we can help teachers and disseminate the promising practices of teachers who do amazing work, right? I mean, that's really the point. On the back of the observation sheet, this helps you understand what people are talking about. So if you look at the front, it's organized based on the way in which language functions in the classroom and the weight of key uses, and also the percentage of engagement and how scaffolding looks in multiple ways. And then on the back, it actually helps you identify the way in which a teacher can ask the kinds of questions that move students to more than simply recounting. I mean, I saw some amazing question asking. I think it was in if you went to kindergarten, where the teacher was asking the kids, so how did you come up with that number? How did you come up with that number? And the child said, oh, my brain, it really likes to do adding. Now, that was a great question, but do you realize what the question was in relationship to the metacognition of the child? How did you do that? Why did you choose that number, not this number? How do you represent your understanding of this problem with a bar graph, with a line graph, with a word problem? I saw that in Canyons, where there was this amazing math teacher. So here's one way to systematize the way in which you can leverage the feedback and put it in the Utah Grants Management System and also use it for your new, T and SS plan, or whatever that is. Yeah. So if you look at the LEA's response, the Grants Management System, I send a report to the district and they disseminate it. There are lots of individual commendations for teachers. So you get a chance to actually give it to the principal. They can celebrate the commendations and the best practices related to scaffolding instruction on grade level content. And then there are, besides that, there's also an explanation of how you disseminate it. I'll give an example from Granite. The report was sent to Martin Bates, who's the superintendent. I think it was about 10 minutes later, he emailed me back. Thank you so much for the commendations. And I sent the recommendations to every principal in the school, and they're sending me an adjusted plan that we can provide the kind of support that they need. Like that, 10 minutes. And when one school, their plan wasn't up to snuff, he actually sent it back to them and sent his Ed Equity and his Title III people out to the school to support them. So I'm giving you concrete examples of how something like a systemic review in relationship to classroom observations can make a huge impact on the culture of the organization, including the district organization, where oftentimes the ALS department ends up being marginalized. Okay, so here's the format, and I know Tiffany is hard at filling it out. and other people. Now what we're going to do is we're going to organize talk teams. So if you look at page 4 and 5, Diane and I worked on this. So these are common recommendations. So these are patterns across LEAs in 5 areas. Again, the monitoring function, the grants management system, the monitoring report is uploaded. The LEA responds, disseminates it, and then decides what recommendations they're going to work on. So Diana and I spent quite a bit of time organizing this. So remember, these are things that we saw and were recommendations across 10 LEAs. Okay. So it's not like one off. Like here's this LEA and that's an issue. No, we went, yes, it's specialized, but we ended up looking like all the way across to see what patterns we saw. So the first one, and then Diana and I divided up into systems change. So you have actually 2 categories. One is systems change and the other one is instruction, quality instruction. So here are the areas. And we're going to divide you up and have you talk about this. Area 1 is initiatives. And I think I'm going to have Garrett's group do that. Area 2 is mindsets and equitable access to opportunity. So I'm going to have Diana, because she was the Ed Equity Labs, maybe the person here. Maybe go in the back. Get your call in that group. And you would look at mindsets and equitable access to opportunity. Area 3 is engaging parents. I'm actually going to say that Tracy and anybody who's interested in engaging parents, Tracy's work at the middle school was exemplary. Her parents were really incredibly engaged. Jordan School District, by the way, had almost 50 parents on a snow day when the next day they closed school. They had 50 parents at Majestic Elementary with all their kids. And the principal had the lunch lady make hot cinnamon rolls, and then they had drinks. And the quality conversation that parents had in relationship to what they needed from schools, which is actually, by the way, a civil right. Right? So it's a civil right for English learners and their parents. Was amazing. So we're going to have Tracy's group do that. Instructional coaching initiatives, we're going to have Tiffany and her group do that. Quality instruction, Jennifer and anybody who wants to join Jennifer in the back can do that. And then we're going to put up a question. And then we're going to have your report out. And if there's anybody that we haven't included, just go to a table. So the question is, you're going to look at the recommendations and you're going to ask yourself, you have a conversation. So read it first, right? So I'm going to make whoever I named, you can just kind of make sure that that's going to happen. And if there are other people who aren't included, make sure that you join. There might be 2 groups in the back, like the cash people. You can choose whatever. You might want to do quality instruction because there's a small group over there, or how you want to do it. So how might these patterns inform your thinking about your LEA's policies and practices to better support English learners and their families? If you have schools in TSI, realize they have to exit. That group has to exit in 2 years. Right. So this is a great opportunity for you to think about how you can apply what's happening across LEAs as recommendations and what you're actually doing and how you can use that. So we're going to do about, 10 minutes? We're running up of like 5. 5 minutes. Okay, so read it together and then take notes on the back in relationship to sharing out. We'll just hear from each of those groups. Okay, 5 minutes.
Couple of them. Right.
I have a warm.
Thank you so much. You're always thinking.
Yeah.
She doesn't need it, but they don't know.
If 5 is the target.
So this.
What are the things that
Which the issues that I said.
No, I know.
So this didn't say
So I guess then,
so you've got that up
yeah.
here. So
Then you can prioritize.
it's like in the fourth grade. There were 2 English learners. So tier 1 expression was like school. And the 2 kids rose as a classroom. We had imaginary drove the teacher thinks that they're not
able enough to be included into the fourth grade quality test and whatever system. So she isolates kids that wouldn't have on headphones from having their body. Yes, I know. That's why you have, almost 300 schools and improvements.
I think they're pretty close to the same.
The diversity.
Yeah.
Program, I mean, it's basically just strategy. It's put in there for several.
It doesn't feel real.
So I had to proceed and they're very small through the lenses just straight.
Right.
And like I don't see students.
6, 7.
These are not smart. And the tactician, the level of that
So happy. So that's what it is.
so there was high school in Minnesota and what
That's exhausting.
and here's what I thought, wow, this word, the level, and
they're nice girls.
he's so big that teacher's grade
We had a question on which
It's really what you're doing is
and so thinking in that regard, that's
so these are so we saw a variety of
There's systems
and then we'll see some other
where they are.
so then they interact with the teacher.
more time. Is there a system
Procedures where initiatives are
Speaking out loud with teachers. Yeah, it was students talking about their learning.
That's my question. I was an
Yeah.
training.
So there's no Jesus, I already told my
Yeah, sorry, I went. Okay.
Check out that. Yeah. But I like the question. What is our system?
And all these years.
We'll kind of follow up.
In my last one, she had one unless you're going back. But the best part, the district said, there are multiple ways.
So we just wanted to have their there were times where actually
well, there's three principles, there's
I'm hoping to change that.
but I think it's good for
Obviously, this should be something that's targeted towards tier 2 and tier 3 kids.
along with that.
However, how much time are they students out? That harming them from having that rich experience in the classroom. And so, trying to prioritize it. How do we mitigate? We know that we have to pull students A out for some of this, but how do we mitigate and also for her missing
but always
I know what I'll need. Are there like
any phrases?
yeah, and they want to this is like part of the
It's also bring like the technical
definitely very good, and that's because instruction. It was good to make off. I'm giving you that. I just meant that hey, everybody is it sounds like this framework you're doing
Okay, so let's put that together.
I did mine. Have you ever got a little face because he said he wanted to be that fast? I said that's fine, but I was like,
Okay, so let's put that together. Just to hear from each group and we'll start back. That's when you go to other districts and still. So quality. Quality and seriously, that's in your school district.
Then I'm not gonna. Annalise, I know she's like waxing out. So quality instruction, we're just gonna go back and just say one thing, either about the recommendations or your conversation. Okay. Anybody in the back, instruction? Yeah.
This is for you. We talked about no headphones.
Oh, headphones.
The big ideas that we talked about.
Yeah, there's more to that.
Important.
Yes. Okay, so let me just say, this is a caveat. I've seen the absolute worst instruction in schools using software. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, this group over here.
Sorry.
Yeah, equitable. One thing that you talked about. This is not like, Okay. Okay, well, any other group that's ready to say something?
We're ready to say it.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
You're
I was
pointing at me. I noticed that.
But we are ready. We had a great conversation about making sure that we connect with administrators and that knowing, and by the way, we're the coaching group. So having instructional coaches and administrators in the building, and some of the great people in my table talked about how they are able to have monthly professional learning with both of those teams together, and the importance of structure. That if a coach is only at the district or only at a school, that there doesn't seem to have the same leverage of impact. But having those two groups working together to create a vision at the district level, but also implementation of what you're doing to make sure that administrators have those assurances is really, really powerful in our conversation.
Yeah, actually I usually have 3 focus groups: focus group with parents, focus group with instructional coaches, and then focus group with administrators and the principals. And some of the most amazing, transformative, honest, transparent conversations came out from instructional coaches. Just incredibly frustrated about how they're assigned, principals being changed, no continuity, no differentiated professional development for them. Very, very compelling, as well as the parents. So another group, I won't point my finger, Gary.
We generated actually another question. Is there a system or procedure in place where initiatives are being reviewed for the purpose of, are these initiatives conflicting? When we're pulling a student out for tier 2 instruction, is that minimizing his or her tier 1 instruction? And are we mitigating these concerns?
Yeah, that's a great one. I actually saw some of the best tier 1 instruction in the 4th grade. And the 2 English learners were sitting with the group. They weren't isolated. But guess what? They had headphones on. They were listening to a software program. Not to mention the isolation and the stigma, But anyway, that's one example. Anybody else from the groups? Yes.
We had another comment here, Jennifer.
We just talked about really this comes down to a lack of knowledge for quality instruction, and something like universal design for learning or strategies for how to scaffold for instruction could be very valuable for teachers. Cash is going through some of this with theirs, and the teachers are really saying, we don't know how, we'd be happy to, but we just don't know how to kind of scaffold or differentiate our instruction. Ellie saw some good models, and they're really using that universal design for learning principles that comes out of the work done in Harvard. That we've done some work at the agency with, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with that work. It really takes different approaches to allow all learners to have access to grade level core instruction. So thinking about opportunities for how do we support LEAs in building your capacity to build teacher knowledge in this area if needed. Having done English learners in the past, it is generally a lack of knowledge experience of, I don't know what I don't know, and so I don't do those things.
Thanks.
Well, I think what kind of struck me that we are all very similar. I mean, these recommendations are so universal, and that we're all somewhere on the path of these. And then my little bit of editorializing. I think it's too bad that we don't have systems in place where we can collaborate with each other across districts, because there's so much power in that, and we're stronger together, and we're all kind of doing the same work in isolation. Great to be able to.
And so the last group is in the back. So just share something about your conversation.
And we talked quite a bit about gifted classes, AP, IB programs, all of those sorts of things, and the underrepresented populations in those, and how that creates inequities. And we talked a little bit about selection processes. And for example, in math, you kind of wind up being placed in a lot of our districts through some sort of an evaluation that at least includes RISE, or it might have multiple measures, and that's how kids are being placed. But if down below, there's not this encouragement to help move kids that direction, and there's not the deeper learning in the classroom, then they don't get there in the first place, and so they underperform, and then it's just a self-perpetuating thing. So we talked a little bit about that. I don't think we came up with any great solutions at this point, and that's why we were sort of quiet when you called on us, because it was like,
I don't know if we came up with a good solution to that. But actually, the new board rule in relationship to early college access and advancement is going to be based on funding. So if you actually want funding, then you're going to deal with the issue of underrepresentation.
Right,
And
so we've got to figure it out.
And there aren't going to be those barriers and those requirements when kids come and they ask counselors, can I be in an IB class? And the counselor says no, because you're not qualified.
Yeah. Well, and for AP, I mean, you're not allowed to do that, and we don't sort and select that way, but you see it with our gifted programs that feed into it. You know, if you have like honors classes, and some of our schools still have honors classes and some do not, because you can address giving a child honors credit in a totally different way than having them tracked. And so we're seeing more and more of that. I think it's a lot more beneficial for our kids when we don't track them and just allow them to accomplish the things that they need to on standards-based grading. If they can achieve that 4, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter whether they're in a particular class or not.
Well, not to mention, it's a civil rights violation as well. If it's a disproportionality of students who aren't represented, then you have to actually look at how you're violating the rights of English learners and their families.
Right, yeah. What's at play here? What are we not providing that we should be providing so that kids can get access?
Right. So let's make sure that you do look at all of the other ones for the groups that you weren't in, and you'll probably see some things there that that would be true of your own LEA. And if you're not an LEA that's been visited already, then you might want to look at that and say, how could we get this fixed before we get visited, so that maybe by the end of the time Christelle gets through all of the LEAs, we start to see some real changes. Like, how can we make some changes in some of these things that benefit primarily the language learners, but really every student out in the school. So Christelle, she left, but I thank her. I thank her for coming. And now we're going to talk about the Utah Data Privacy Agreement.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Any place I need to stand in particular? Okay, great. So I want to start with a question for everyone in the room, even those who are in the teaching and learning department. So if a teacher came to you and said, I found a really cool free website that does, and then fill in the blank with whatever they might come to you for. So maybe it's a program that uses personalized learning to teach Common Core math, or it's a formative writing tool, or it's a program that says that it'll help raise students' DIBEL scores by 20% by the end of the year. Whatever it is, what are your concerns? What are your questions? And what really would you like the procedure to be? What would you tell that teacher? And this is audience participation time. Yeah.
Number 1, does it require me to enter student data?
That's a good question that we ask. I don't know if you're just telling us what we want to hear.
No, I would. That's one thing I would ask.
Okay, great.
Definitely. I don't want that data out there into areas where I don't know whether it's going to be protected or not.
Okay, great. Is there? You can just speak without raising hands. We're not fighting over who gets to talk.
What is their student data privacy disclosure? What does that look like?
Okay, the companies, you mean? What are they going to do with it? Right? We all remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook. I thought I was just using it to share with family and friends. In reality, I was using it, the information I was sharing, to apparently influence political campaigns. Unaware of that. Anyone else, or even just with your curriculum director hat on? Like, what is the practice in your LEA? Are you encouraging of this? Is there a process they need to go through before they should start using this website? What do you tell them?
So everything has to be approved at the district level.
Okay.
Depending on the sharing, there has to be an MOU in place. We had this happen just the other day, and they're on free stuff, and all of a sudden it's got ads, and something pops up that's inappropriate, and oh crap, and
right, exactly.
Way beyond data privacy.
Yeah. And I think that was kind of the thing I wanted to get us thinking about, is there are concerns with this in general, and it's unfortunately not going to go away so long as our schools have internet connections. But regarding the privacy side of things, I'm going to pass it over to Jess to talk about, we are looking at some solutions to at least make the experience of having to have a data privacy agreement with a vendor, try and simplify it for LEAs. So at least that part isn't as hard. You can worry about whether, it's pedagogically sound or other concerns you might have with it. But we're trying to get it where the privacy part's a little bit easier. And I'm going to run to another meeting right now. So take it away, Jess.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm here to talk about our data privacy agreement that we've created. Like David said, there is a process, and people are finding new apps and websites they want to use. They get really excited, and there is a process that needs to be followed. I don't know where I'm. Oh, there we go. So we have created a data privacy agreement for LEAs in the state of Utah that meets all federal and state requirements. So there actually is a law in place in Utah saying that you have to have contracts with apps or third-party vendors that are collecting PII from your students. So we've created something that meets the floor, that has all of those components, all of those requirements in it. And LEAs, especially districts or charters that might not have a full legal team, might not have an entire group of people vetting these apps, can have this document and not have to create their own every time. So with this, we also have an Exhibit E. So this is a general offer of terms. This is an exhibit on the data privacy agreement that allows other LEAs to subscribe on to existing DPAs by signing this one page. So they would see that maybe Granite has signed with Schmoop or WeVideo, or these are actually ones that have been signed. And you can go on and put your information on this one page, email it to the vendor, and now you don't need to do that anymore. So this is really exciting. And what we've seen is that there's a burden to get the agreement signed, to negotiate the terms, to track everything that's collecting PII, especially when it's free and you might not have a contract in place or it might not have gone through procurement. So my job is to create solutions and tools. These are optional. They're resources for LEAs to use. I'm trying to kind of take some of that burden off of LEAs by doing that process. So we have Exhibit E on the DPA. With the DPA, we've also created a Utah Student Privacy Alliance page. The Alliance page is kind of a registry where you can house all of your signed agreements, but you can also go in and see what's being signed nationally because it is a part of a consortium. So there's more transparency and you can see what other states are getting signed. So just to let you know the timeline, this is very new. We're slowly rolling this out. So I started at the end of October. We've been onboarding a few LEAs. We have about 9 that have been onboarded. We did kind of roll out some awareness at the Utah Coalition for Educational Technology Conference. We're developing a training to onboard for this that will be available online. and then that should be available next month. And at the conference, we did a poster session, we had that available, we had a vendor list of who would be attending, and we started that DPA process with them, with some of the LEAs that had been onboarded. So if anyone was there, they had a badge saying they've signed it, and we'll have more of that recognition to kind of incentivize them to agree to student data privacy standards. And I did want to just briefly show you, in case you do know the person who is doing this process and want to kind of let them know what's being rolled out and who they can contact. Our Alliance page is part of a national consortium, so it does have a little bit more weight. The data privacy agreements are modeled similarly, so vendors are recognizing them and are more willing to sign and protect our student data. Let's see. You can also see, this is our Utah homepage, but on the national page, you can, without logging in, you can search the database. So if you want to search by resource, you can also see, like you said, content, and David was mentioning if there's a math app for middle school that a teacher really wants to use, and maybe they're not really agreeing to data privacy standards, you can search and find something who is nationally, which is really exciting. So with this, you can see if you search Quizlet under resources that they have declined to sign. Quizlet has not signed data privacy agreements across the country. They are aware of that. People ask us if they know, but they do know. So then maybe you find something that offers that same program, but will adhere to those standards and protect student data privacy. So there's also tools for LEAs if they want to have more transparency. They can have a list of this on their homepage and have that available to teachers, what is safe to use within their district or school. And then also what is not, who has not agreed to this. So this kind of helps out teachers who are trying to navigate the system, know where to go, know what they can use, and make that all easier, since I'm sure everyone knows you are all working 5+ jobs in one, and we just want to simplify as much as possible. Then here's an example of what we have right now in the Utah Alliance Registry and the DPAs that we have signed. I know I'm going through this quickly. I just want to raise some awareness, let you know that we are rolling this out. I am providing onboarding trainings with the data privacy agreement and also the Alliance page. So if you know anyone who is going through this process, if you, next time you're thinking of a teacher says, hey, we want to use this, kind of keep this in the back of your mind, and feel free to link me into any of those conversations within your LEAs. Questions? That was a lot, I know. Yes?
You talked about a registry. Is this a database somewhere that we can connect with? I mean, working with instructional materials, and I could see that there could be a connection here.
Yes, no, that's a great point. So this is part of the Alliance page. It is a website that has a lot of different resources and tools in it. So once DPAs are signed, they would be uploaded into this registry on that Alliance page. So that will kind of house all of the agreements. You can see who is signed, where you can subscribe on, things like that. I can also give you my card and we can connect on that and kind of figure out how those would link.
Thank you, Jessica. On the agenda, but she perhaps went upstairs to the other meeting. So I think, Garrett, are you going to do introductions of our Wasatch friends?
We can do Wasatch, yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do our Wasatch friends. You know, one of the things that we really like to do is highlight things that are going well in different places across the state. And so there are some really great things going on in literacy in Wasatch School District. So we asked them to come today and share that with you.
As you can see, there's a large contingent of Wasatch representatives coming up. They presented at the secondary literacy directors meeting last week, knocked it out of the park. Put a high bar for you for today. I know you guys will do awesome again. They've done some really super things. They found a serious issue at the secondary level, and I'm not going to give a whole lot away because they can explain it a lot better than I could. And they can really bring it home as to why it was so important for them and how they addressed it. But it was really encouraging for me to see at the secondary level things that can work as long as there's willing participants to see that what those deficits are at the secondary level, addressing those concerns, and making a program that's going to be effective for all the students involved. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to Jim Judd, and I'll let him introduce his team and take it from here.
Have the
Oh, he's got the clicker this time. Sorry.
Well, thank you guys for this opportunity. And as you can see, we've got a big group here. They'll all have a point to say with this presentation, and I'll let them introduce themselves and what role they play when it's their turn to get up. So where this started with us is in the fall of 2017, the year 17-18. Jennifer Throsta came in the beginning of the school year and visited with our superintendent and basically said, we're here because we've looked at your DIBELS data and it looks like you could use some help. And that was a little embarrassing to us. Not the kind of visit we had hoped for. And it started a conversation that became very serious very quickly about, is this where we think we are, where we're getting these visits? And we better look at this. And so we started a whole initiative, K-12. We're here specifically talking about the secondary, but just for you elementary people out here, this also involved going to all-day kindergarten for our district, a significant expansion into preschool, and early intervention, a new curriculum for the elementary, but we're not going to focus on that in this presentation. But as we are going through that, our wake-up call started with the superintendent saying, if anything else that we're going to give access to kids, they have to leave our system being literate. And we can't be okay with these numbers. So I'll turn it over to Lana, and she'll introduce herself and then talk about our sense of urgency.
Okay, so I was hired thanks to Jennifer. I don't think she understood that she did this, but they decided that we should probably have a K-12 literacy specialist in our district. So this is the first year that I have been in this position. But as Jim mentioned, we have a lot of initiatives we're doing in the elementary level, and we're really excited about that. But that still does not solve the problem of we have around 50% of our students coming into secondary below grade level, and around 30% of them are 2 grade levels below. So it wasn't just kind of let's just forget about secondary and move on to elementary. So with the help of this team, they've done all the work. We've been able to fix some of these. So next.
So going back to the research, we decided we needed to get a vision here and let this vision kind of drive this. So we started with what we called our team literacy. And if you look at the comic behind, you can see some of the original members in the crowd over here behind if you've got discerning eyes. This was our group that we decided we're going to start to create this culture and this vision that we're about literacy on the secondary level, which really hadn't in our district been in place before, but we decided it has to be in place now because it's our big, wildly important goal. And so with that, this is just a tweet that our high school principal gave out a couple of weeks ago, where you can see here at the end, literacy remains as the fundamental promise to all students. And so building that culture from the superintendent to the school board down to the administration, literacy is our fundamental promise to every kid, is where this process all started. So we'll kind of get into the logistics of what that process actually looked like.
The next slide.
Yeah, every slide.
Thanks. I'm Jenny Meekum. I am an assistant principal up in Wasatch at Timpanogos Middle School. So as we started looking at literacy, we felt like we needed to come up with very effective things in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So starting in Tier 1, we felt like all teachers, no matter what their content level, needed to be held to the literacy standards. And so we felt like that was probably the most important thing. I know looking ahead, we're thinking about maybe pulling out specific standards and giving them to, like our health teacher and other things so that they can implement more of that literacy on top of their curriculum as well. Along with those literacy standards, of course, comes good classroom instruction and a variety of assessments. And in order to make sure that that's happening at Tier 1, we felt like we needed to implement some effective professional development for all of our teachers. And so part of that, we wanted to focus on literacy and also focus on engagement strategies and structures for our teachers. Some of those professional development things that we have given to our teachers are things like teaching them how to teach fluency. We introduced dyad reading to them to use in their classrooms, taught them the importance of vocabulary, writing, comprehension, showed them close reads, so that they were able to, whether they were teaching history or science, being able to use some of those literacy structures in their classroom to help our English department reach the kids school-wide. The other thing that we wanted to stress with our teachers is continually reteaching and differentiating. We didn't want to wait for Tier 2 and lay it all on Tier 2. So we felt like they needed to understand that it was important for them to be reteaching and reassessing their students during Tier 1. As far as Tier 2, we have the program iLit, which we have been using for our ELL students. Those that scored a 2 to 5 on their WIDA scores are the ones that we use that for Tier 2. We've used the program Language Live, and this we've used for our students that come in below an 800 Lexile reading level. We have 3 different levels of classes, so those below an 800 we have put into Class 2 and Class 3, depending on their level and where they're at. The other thing, we have tried to provide stretch intervention for our bubble kids, the ones that maybe we didn't feel like were far enough behind to be in a class, but yet still needed a little bit of help to get them where they needed to be. And then we stress to our teachers that stretch intervention needs to be PLC directed, and that reading has a priority. So that's important to us, that those readers, low readers, are getting the reading help that they need. And then Tier 3, that is our intensive program. At my school, we are using Language Live for our Reading 1 kids. And those kids actually get their reading class every single day. We've seen lots of progress, having them meet every day and get that instruction. And then we've been using iLit for our newcomers, those ones who come in that speak no English. They're the ones that are testing at a 1 on WIDA. Some of the screeners that we have used are incoming 6th grade. We've used Dibbles. We also have used, we're going to use RISE, and teacher input is important on that as well. Our incoming 7th and 8th grade, we're using the RI, we're using RISE as well as teacher input. And then any move-ins that we have that come into the district, we do have them take the RI when they move in to see if they need to be placed in a reading class.
So Jenny, my name is Katie Cummings. I'm an assistant principal at Rocky Mountain Middle School, the other middle school in Heber. Jenny mentioned the programs that we use. Language Live we didn't have until this year. It's the first year that we've done it. So when we were talking about this reading problem, we had been using iLit, and we thought, I don't know if it's quite what we want, if it's addressing all the needs we have. So we asked some experts what they would recommend, and they recommended looking at a couple programs, and Language Live was one of them. And when we started looking into it, we really liked it because it was created specifically for middle school. It's a 2-year program, so you can build and improve over 2 years. And then it's specific to those kids' needs. It's working on the holes they have way down to phonemic awareness and phonics and building on it. It's also created by Louisa Motes, who's really strong in the reading world, has a really good reputation. So we've really been pleased what we've seen. It also addresses not just their holes, but works on grade level content. So they're getting gaps filled rather than growing gaps. The high school loved Language Live also, but realized it wouldn't really work for them. So again, consulting more experts, they landed on Achieve 3000. They liked that it is nonfiction, that it uses text from their core in science and social studies, and the program they could adapt and use as needed. It didn't have to be used with fidelity. It was, you could take and choose and use. So those are the programs that we landed on.
You can imagine staffing is a little bit unique. I'm Claire Mayer, from Wasatch High School, assistant principal there. When you announce to everyone that your major goal, that your priority is literacy, and then ask, okay, who wants to teach it? Sometimes that's not too exciting to people. And the further you get away from elementary, the scarier it is for teachers. They don't feel capable. They're not trained. Our English teachers, for example, they're like, we are not reading teachers. We don't know how to do this. We have staffed throughout the district in different ways. We have some special education teachers that are doing a little bit of literacy. We have some positions where we had growth positions, so we were able to advertise, or we had people retire and we were able to fill in that way. We at the high school were able to bring an elementary teacher up who is doing English language development. And she has a couple of literacy classes, but most of our literacy classes are taught by English teachers who actually, Mr. Jim came in and appealed to their passion for literacy, even if they felt inadequate, and just really made a compelling case about why this was so important. And they volunteered. And even though they were scared to death, they have done an amazing job. So this is our tip. For staffing, no matter what program you use, or no matter what your structure within your school is going to be like, you need to have one thing that your staffing has in common, and that is they need to instill in those kids confidence. It needs to feel safe, and the teachers that we have used, we have noticed they just need to love the kids. And if you get someone that loves the kids, they're going to love their teacher. Our students give up an elective to be in that class. So you know that you have to have someone who's willing to give up something that they normally would like to do something they know they're not good at. That is really a vulnerable spot for high school kids to be in. And so your staffing needs to be really critical that they are going to make that connection with kids.
So teen literacy went from a group of 4 of us to a much bigger group of people very quickly. When we talk about collective efficacy and trying to solve these problems with a large group together, we start pulling in people all across our secondary cone, including school psychologists and instructional coaches and our school librarians. On the secondary level, we reclassified our school librarians as literacy coaches, so that we have a primary function for what they're doing with the PLCs. And this is just a portion of the teen literacy group we have now.
My name is Nate Mitchell. I'm an instructional coach at the high school.
And I'm Bridget Bakula. I'm a school psychologist for the district.
Before we hop into progress monitoring, I just want to share a story that kind of frames why we progress monitor. In high school, my brother was a sophomore. He came to me at the end of the year, and how we would get our classes from one year to the next was we'd take this sheet of paper around, and teachers would circle what class to go to the next year. So my brother, who had a hearing issue and a speech impediment, was always in remedial classes. He came to me at the end of his sophomore years in tears, saying, "My teachers won't let me out." So, being the great brother I am, I erased all of his circles and circled honors down the row. Thought, somebody will catch this, right? That next year, he got straight A's in all honors classes. Now, I illustrate that because what we're trying to do is to help kids progress. And if they don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, it's very discouraging for them. So with Progress Monitor, I would say it's more of a byproduct than it was something that we did starting out. We didn't initially come up with we need to have a progress monitor. What we said was, if we're going to put students in this based on criteria, then we absolutely need to let them know what criteria they have to meet in order to be able to exit. So Jenny talked about some different programs that they use to identify students. At the high school, we use the NWEA assessment to identify struggling students in multiple areas, not just literacy. But then Bridget will talk about what we do district-wide to monitor progress.
So I was asked to come in and help with the applied math part of analyzing the data. And so we'll use reading inventory to get Lexile scores for students. We use the first two data points that we received, combined them to find an average for our baseline. And then we've been tracking students ever since, just with, I think every 8 weeks is what we're doing. And then taking the data from our baseline, and we're applying rate of improvement and then also just effect size overall for the different programs we're using to determine if the programs are, effectively addressing the needs of the students within that program. And then also we can look at individual growth with the rate of improvement.
And so what we've seen from that is students knowing what the exit criteria are, they start asking for the test. And that is a switch in mentality. The kids are begging for the test. They want out, right? They are looking forward to and are excited about the next time that they're going to take their assessment. And we've had several students who worked their butts off to get out and get exited. We had some students who made such progress that we brought them into the office and we were celebrating with them, and we had a counselor there ready for them to select their next class. And the student said, I don't want to go. And I'd stay in the class because it was so beneficial to them. If you can get those kids to taste success, that's all the publicity you'll need for a program like this.
Thanks. And I'll just testify a little bit. That 0.4 effect size that Hattie talks about, that's hard to come by. And we're 3/4 into our first year of doing this. And I can see why that's such a high mark, that 0.4, because we're struggling to get to that point at where we are in our journey here. Okay, so particularly secondary people, you may be thinking the kind of yeah buts why this wouldn't work in our district. So here are some of the barriers that we found going down this journey to give you maybe some tips if you try to go down this yourself.
I'm Tara Jarvie. I'm the literacy coach, librarian, and a reading teacher at Timpanogos Middle School. Motivation is a huge issue with middle schoolers in general anyways. And it seems to them like a life sentence. By the time they get to middle school, if they need a reading class and their parents sign off on it, they're like, oh, really? More? So the biggest thing you need to do, first of all, is make class exciting. Now, I'm grateful to have the program that we have. We have Language Live. I'm an elementary trained teacher, but I've spent my entire career in secondary school. I couldn't teach phonics just right out the chute. So I'm grateful for that program. It has another classroom component where we read stories and do things together, which is great. They're worksheets though. And so I really appreciate that my district gives me training on engagement structures and things that I can substitute instead of worksheets so that we keep class engaging. They can't feel like they're walking into the same class every day and doing the same things every day, even if you are. Maybe go outside one morning so that we can make them engaged in the curriculum. Another thing is that we have to celebrate their successes, just like we like to do. When we do something awesome, we like to celebrate. They do too. I know that at the high school, they do a lot of celebrations. They take them into the office and tell everyone when they've improved. I know that in middle schools, they get to go in and visit the vice principals and get treats, and we celebrate when they're making progress. A huge thing for my specific class, which is composed of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, is for them to know where they started, how much progress they've made, and if they continue at this rate, how long will it take for them to catch up? Not will they catch up, how long will it take for them to catch up? And I've been so lucky to be part of some of the trainings that the state has put on. I've been able to go to those and learn the things that I need to know so I can tell my students, hey, we know that this works and this is why it works and this is why you need to do it, and give them the information that I have to make them invest again in reading.
Okay, one of the, I guess one of the barriers was where do we fit this into the kids' schedule? Especially when you have those kids who have struggled through elementary, are now in secondary and are still struggling. They're the ones that have been in those classes over and over and over. So some of the schools did decide for their students to give up an elective. They felt like for them, that was the way that they needed to work it out. At Timpanogos Middle School, we kind of took a different view of that and felt like we wanted to give the kids the electives that they wanted to have, because some of our students that had to be in a reading class were also in our dual immersion classes, which then created even a tighter schedule for them. So we felt like we need to give them some choices. So at my school, what we decided to do was we felt like we would take, put in place the reading class in place of one of their elective, or not their elective, but their core classes that was required. So 6th grade, we chose to give them the reading class in place of a class like World Civ, where we felt like they were going to take it again in high school. Having it in 6th grade was not necessarily a prerequisite. We felt like we could take them out of classes like leadership and STEM because they were going to revisit those classes in 8th grade as well. 7th grade, we chose to take them out of their CCA classes. We felt like when they got into, later in 7th grade or in 8th grade, they could then take the sewing and the cooking and the shop classes that also would be covered in CCA. And then 8th grade, the same thing. We chose to take them out of either a leadership or a STEM class because they could have previously had that in 6th grade. So it was important to us to give them their electives, but yet find core classes that we could take them out of that we didn't think would really cause a problem in the future.
So because we're trying to make these changes in schedules, we, at the middle school and high school, we said, if you're not reading on level, you're going to be required to take this class. So we sent home a letter notifying parents of this. And in the letter, we also talk about other benefits of being able to read on level, how it can help improve your memory, it can help with your analytical thinking skills, it can help with your focus and concentration, just benefits of being able to read. It will make school easier and those things. And when you talk to parents, they want their kids to be successful, of course. But sometimes when they've struggled over the years, they start to lose faith in us. So when parents would call, we'd talk to them and explain and be able to just tell them we have faith in our teachers that are teaching it. We have faith in the program, and here's why, and here's the research. Sometimes some of the hardest parents are the hardest to convince are the ones that their child is in honors and has straight A's. And so when that happens, it's really good that we have the data behind it to show, well, we've been doing this reading inventory if they're not in the class, we've done it 3 times during the year, and their scores are consistently below where they should be. And the fact that they have straight A's, a lot of that can be attributed to their really good work ethic, and they're willing to put in the work to do it. That usually helps parents understand we have data behind it. And then also we tell them we'd really like to fix this issue now versus in the high school, because you're going to have the same conversation with the high school. And that's really helped too, that the high school has our back, that they're doing it also. So parents know it's not going away. And then sometimes we've, with some of the classes where the students aren't as far behind, they're only a semester at my school. So we were able to say, well, how about we put this class second semester? If your child on their own wants to try and catch up that little bit they're behind, then we can exit them out. And we did have a couple of parents and students who chose that option and did read more and were able to qualify to not be in the reading class. But parents want their kids to be successful, and so I think they appreciate when we have data to show that we're striving to help them be successful.
And this is no small feat. You saw our stats. It's about 30% of these kids are that far behind. That's phone calls that those 3 assistant principals made to that many parents, basically selling a car, like a used car salesman. What does it take to get you in this reading class today? Type of mentality. And those 3 sold it to 30% of our parents.
It's actually easier to sell it to our parents than to the high school counselors. They are the advocate for kids, and you guys, some of you are nodding, and you realize that they are the gatekeepers for their happiness and success at school a lot of the time, and they take that very seriously, and they're all so well-intentioned. But when I first started having these initial conversations with our high school counselor, it was in the summer, and we weren't staffed yet or anything, and it was so new, and the letters had gone home, and the phone calls were starting, and it was time to have those conversations in earnest, and it was tough. And it got hot in there, and they were not very happy. And it took a little while. It took a long time to let them see why this was so beneficial. And as soon as we got our staff, it was really after we were able to say, these are who will have the kids in class, that it was just a collective sigh of relief because of who was going to be with those kids. And then they knew, okay, this is going to work. They're fantastic teachers. They could teach anything. The kids will be taken care of. And then since then, they've seen the benefits, and they're very, very supportive. And so it's actually been a positive experience, but just don't leave the counselors out when you plan for this.
So like I said earlier, we're just 3/4 into our first year of trying to do this. We're seeing a lot of success, and we're very motivated right now about the pathway we're going and the journey we're doing. Now we're looking at trying to mimic this in numeracy and see what it looks like if we try to go down that road with that. But that's kind of what we're doing at Wasatch. And Jennifer, I don't know where our time is, if you want to open it up to some questions or.
Diana's better on the agenda today in terms of
So
time.
if people have questions, yeah, we want to take the time to honor that.
Yes.
You finding the students you qualify have attendance issues, or is it a group that they're attending and that is
So
an
I'll let
issue?
Nate speak to that, Nate and Bridget, because they're our progress monitors, but the short answer is some, yes.
But for the most part, no, we kind of assumed a large overlap between those two populations, and it really wasn't the case. And like I said, once students started to feel like it was working for them, they're really motivated to come.
I think one of the unique pieces is they have an exit. The kids are clear about how I get out. This is not a prison sentence. They have counselors ready to move them classes. It is not, you have to be in this class all year. It's really a fluid system that has taken a lot of work on your end to make happen, but it's not meant to be you have to be in this class. It is you have to be in this class as long as you need it, and as soon as you show you don't need it, we are happy to put you somewhere else. Not that
That's
some of them
part
are
of that.
opting in.
That's part of that discussion with the counselors. You have to take a rigid secondary schedule and make it look more elementary-ish in that this is fluid. And if this kid exits, counselors, we're going to find a home for them because they're going to leave when they're ready to leave.
You exit at quarter semester or anytime during the quarter when they're ready to go.
Anytime they're ready to go.
I have kids asking to come in now. They're like AP kids saying, I don't really read all that well. I just work hard. Because their kids are experiencing success and that spreads.
Yes.
What has changed in their English classes?
That's the
next
step.
So, and Claire, you can jump in if you need to here. So when we first approached this initiative, the English language arts people feel like, man, this can't be our burden. You know, we've got a core and we've got to do this. And so we used a framework from Mike Matos, and for those of you familiar with Mike and his Taking Action book, and we said this is not going to sit on language arts tier 1 instruction. This is, and you saw our pyramid there, this sits outside of that. Now we're using some language arts people to help teach that, but this is not taking place. We're not removing any kids out of their content-based tier 1 instruction for language arts. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, but I'm wondering if there's any bleed over into what's happening in English because of the success kids are having there, if you're seeing bleed into English classes.
Yes, Very
make
much
those
so.
instructional strategies with the things that are happening that's affecting that.
Yeah, and because the majority of these teachers are language arts teachers, they know what the kids are getting, and so they're bringing those discussions back to their PLCs, saying, I know what they're getting in reading, so we can start doing this and this.
Claire, you might want to talk about the literacy push, just whole school.
Oh, well, I hate to say too much about this because it's a long story and this is going to sound really simple, and it's not. We started having need conversations with every teacher, regardless of what they were teaching, about what can you do to read in your classroom, and not just read, but have meaningful reading experiences. And collectively as a group, our staff committed, regardless of what they teach, to give each student a minimum of one meaningful interaction with text per week. So that's outside of the curriculum where you would where the responsibilities are literacy with science and social studies and language arts. So the whole school committed to doing that. I think some are doing great. I know there are some, because they tell on each other, to be honest with you. We have some who need some more help. But just as Jenny and Katie and some others who were sharing today, sometimes that comes with they just need more help, they need to feel comfortable in knowing what that means to give their students a meaningful interaction with text. So we're continuing to do professional development with them to give them some confidence and some structures to use with their classes, so they're not just saying, here, read this, because they don't feel confident in doing that. And we have a ways to go, but we've also come quite a ways.
One of those need conversations was getting our school librarians to say, I'll be a literacy coach. Yeah. Because for these content teachers saying, okay, I'm all aboard dyad reading, I don't know what that means, where do I go from here? We had to have a coaching component to this, and if your districts are like ours, you don't have secondary literacy coaches, so we had to create them.
Online, someone would like to know if you will share your parent letter.
Sure. Just have them email me. I'm James Judd at Wasatch, and we'll get them a copy of the letter.
Actually, if you're willing to share it, if you'll send it to John, John can follow through with you, and then we'll
Maybe
just
I
put
better
it on
say
the...
this. What district are they in? Sure.
Let's put it with the materials, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. It's nice to have examples of where things are going well, right? And to think about what we can all do to move that direction. Really appreciate you guys coming down today. So now we'll move back on the agenda, and Jennifer is going to talk to us about instructional materials.
All right, so mine is more of getting your thoughts, so it's more feedback. I've gotten enough calls over the years, the library person, around what do we do with the district when a parent disputes a text that we want to read in English class, for example. So I think of Mice and Men was my most recent call, that they don't want their child reading it, that they kind of want it outlawed, and kind of just book banishing kind of idea. So one of my thoughts after numerous phone calls over the years is, do we need a state policy that you can reference that gives you a little more teeth in, we followed what's required, there's nothing more to be done here, that if the state has had a policy. A lot of you call to ask, does the state have a policy? We do not. And it's totally up to your local decision on what your process is, if you have a committee, and some of that choice is great until it comes to really meaty conversations and you have to say, well, we followed our local policy and there's no state policy to back you up on that local policy. So the conversation is, one, would something like that be needed or warranted? And if so, how might we go about exercising it? So thinking about even within your tables, I'm going to have you just discuss, like, what is your process when somebody says, I'm not going to let my child read this book? And is this an opportunity for us to have some teeth at the state level to support you in that process that would still leave you some local flexibility of what that looks like? Most of you engage committees that have diverse perspectives, that kind of thing. This would just reinforce that you can say we followed state and local policy. That might give you a little more teeth with some families that you battle on a frequent or just once in a while basis that it's like, we're not going to give up with mice and men. We'll have that alternate assignment or whatever you choose to do. But is it time for a policy? If it's not, totally good with that too. But I just had so many calls over the years that I wonder if it is an opportunity to facilitate a conversation around that. So if you don't mind kind of talking at your tables about your interaction with this and whether a state policy might be better, if you could obviously weigh in on whatever that policy would look like, but whether we need one or not would probably be most helpful at this point. Questions about the task? So just maybe a few minutes to talk at your tables, and then we'll share out a little bit.
No, I was just
Yeah, but it's changed. It's less about like I don't think parents or anyone here we don't want to be that's very and anyway, it's just easy to say. I just I was missing my I don't know that's what I think.
I've gotten these questions 3 times. Yeah, 3 times. I was like, no, this isn't something that you guys are have to do it. I've been supported from this, and I said, here it is. Oh, dear, Rose from the state board said this. A, that was not what I said. B, so you probably just have,
because they may not offer that information.
Yeah, and they really are separate issues. The ones that we also give us the opportunity to require from parents what those that are just really
Pretended they're
when I taught AP, there was only one period that was one story, which I wasn't paying attention to. I just saw the but it's not about state well. The title is very broad. Well, I'm not even teaching that one, so I'm not about these other ones.
Until you run into an issue, you're like, oh,
that was.
then someone goes and like, oh yeah, my
But they would respect that. This one made me a little 7 months ago. I was like, well, I'm not teaching that.
come on back in 10.
Well,
had a coworker who just experienced that one child's 3rd grade high school. And something
we're just going to do a vote, and then you can add commentary. But is this needed or not? So if it's needed, I want you to stand up. If it's not needed, you can say.
Oh, you'll have full body commitment.
I think it's stand up. Oh, that is okay. I just need to say.
We're not voting.
I'm abstaining.
Thank you.
No,
USDA, I can't.
This is just LEA's voting.
It doesn't count.
Yeah.
The vast majority do C and D.
Sitting on my hand.
Glenda, you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I think it's my parent that's probably calling you a lot.
No, parents never call me. I want you to know. They never call for this. It's districts calling to say, I have a difficult parent. Is there a state policy? And I have to say no. And because I get this call frequently enough, I came to the point where I said to Diana, can we have a conversation? Because we don't have a state policy. And I'm not one who's like, ooh, policy. But if one's needed because the field is asking for it, that's where this came from. Is I've had enough calls from people dealing with families that there might be an opportunity to clarify or at least give you some backup of, we followed state policy. We're not going to come up with a list of books that you can and can't read. Like, that's not how I see this going. It's more, you have to have a process, and your process involves blah, blah, blah. And most of you already have that process, but you can say we followed the state process rather than your local board is sometimes sufficient, but in this case, sometimes it gets a little more meat is needed. It's the impression I was taking from all the curriculum directors that have called me over the years. So add to that.
Well, I just think having that broad yet open policy,
it's got to be open,
would be very helpful to us. Yes. That we have, in talking to a parent, we have followed every requirement that the state has asked us to do. In addition, this is what our board has required. Mm-hmm. And then that may give us more, this is what the state's required, but our board has asked us to do this bit more. Yeah. And then that gives us strength to our individual district policies. I think that lends to that. My only other thought of this is that in doing that, does that open a huge can of worms across the state? Because when you start talking about a policy that may potentially give more direction to schools and LEAs on what reading materials, you're going to have all of those people come out. And so that is something that we have to weigh. Yep. It can give us support, but it also might be a nightmare to live through. Yeah. And so you'll have to weigh that. But I think that it could potentially help strengthen what we're trying to do in our districts, because it does seem to be on the rise. Yeah. And it does seem to be that we're taking more and more phone calls on it, even with well-established district policies.
And that's the thing. That's why I haven't acted, is that you have good policy at the local level. And it's not really that state policy would change your local policy. It would basically just be kind of an umbrella of, here are the things that you're already doing encompassed in a policy that would just give you reinforcement of the work. And I think that's why we haven't had a policy. It's because the local level is working so well. Nathan?
Well, I think that's one of the first things that the parents that come in my office, they'll not only, I'll show them the district policy and they'd say, well, is that just our district, or is that what the state said? You know, does the state, they'll usually ask, is there anything more than just what our district has done?
So it would be a good support. Say, well, we have the state and
yeah, we're following, both policies. Yes.
Well, it would definitely be a piece you have to give feedback on, because I don't know what your current policies are. I just know you have them, and that we would not want to add additional burden. It's really just reinforcing your current procedures in a. But Belinda, you're absolutely right. This could rile some friends as well. So to balance that piece out. Okay, what I'll do is I'll move forward and kind of talking with the superintendency around this idea and kind of get their feedback on how they might want to proceed, and then we can bring this back in a future conversation just to support the work you're doing and try and give you a little bit more strength and reinforcement. Come on.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so yellow cards in my hand. While we were having our presentations, I did a little bit of sorting on them because we're not going to have time to get through all of them. So here's oh, thank you, Ellen. Now I have to see where this goes on the slide. So how this will work is I'm going to ask the question, and we're going to just want one answer for each question because there's a whole stack. And my preference will be to get the answer from another curriculum director. Okay, if there's nobody in the room who has an answer for what they do in their LEA, then we'll let the specialists answer if they can. And so a couple of things will happen is this. One, you'll see what's on other people's minds. So it might inform future meetings. It'll also help the specialists here know where there's lack of clarity that we maybe can help you more in the future. Okay, so first question. What is the most impactful strategy, program, or PD you have employed to close the achievement gap? In the elementary school's comprehensive mathematics instruction. Okay, thank you. How are you planning to implement K-5 science standards? I'm just
We need support.
We have a team that's rolling out K-5 professional development with hands-on science modeling. It'll start happening this summer and go through.
Okay, thank you. Can we get a list of ELA curriculum being used around the state? Where and what grades are using it?
Alan's got a hand over there. Someone online.
Developing a new database that's going to have some of that information in it.
Okay, that will be part of the new RIMS program. Does your LEA have specific frameworks or visions in place for specific content areas? For example, a literacy plan, teaching practices in mathematics, or something else? Does your LEA have specific frameworks or visions in place for specific content areas?
Alpine and Granite have them for literacy.
Right. What computer-based programs do you recommend for 4-6 for ELA and math? Maybe this could be one that's going well in your district, charter school. Or Jolie's going to answer.
Not so funny because I looked at Shannon and smiled. I would say that we do have the STEM Action Center that has the Math Software Grant program, but we also would hope and recommend that those are supplementary to provide support, not something that's the primary means of instruction. And so being able to look at the STEM grant, the STEM Action Center, because they've done a lot of research and data about what's being effective, is a good place to look.
I would like some guidance on literacy assessments for struggling secondary readers.
Start with RI.
Like RI. How have you ensured consistent, high-quality ESL services across schools, and how do you measure effectiveness? I don't think. There are more questions than answers, yeah, you're right. Let me try one more time. How have you ensured consistent, high-quality ESL services across schools? Yeah, great.
We have something that, I mean, it's in its infancy, but one thing that FOLA has implemented this year, BL coaches. So we have a coordinator that's K3 and then that works with 412. And that really comes down to funding and how that was divided up. Not that that's equal at all, but there are also coaches that fall under them that work with multiple schools, not one per school or one per two schools, but per an area. And they've been working on getting things, the compliance pieces. But now that they have taken care of that part, they are moving more into an instructional coach role as well. So not just paperwork, but going throughout those schools at all levels is part of their vision. Go in and provide job embedded PD, the on-site math technicians, provide professional development at the schools and work with teachers so that those. A lot of work has been done so far, but still in the beginning stage.
Backman that Christelle mentioned earlier, have a tracking form that every instructional coach and administrator uses. So when they go in the classroom at any time, observable data. Teacher moves are supported. That has worked really well.
How do you know that competency is achieved of an educational objective? How do you know that competency is achieved?
have well-written learning targets or scales, or you have to have very explicit criteria. Once that's written, then you can see that there's it has to be clearly defined for both the teacher.
What are the diagnostic and or screener assessments you use in secondary 712 reading? Same answer as before. And any specific intervention programs you've had success with? Same answer, right? For secondary reading. Okay. How are districts building capacity to provide professional learning to their schools? Doing any work to build capacity for professional learning?
One thing that we tried out this month, because of the focus that we've had with our K3 literacy, had monthly focuses for PD, and then obviously differentiating with embedded professional development with our coaches. But this month, because we've had such a heavy focus on tiered systems and supports, and on establishing routines with what we did this year is, or not this year, but after a pretty deep data dive with all of the teachers in schools, PD was sectioned off so that teachers had an option of which 2 sessions they wanted to go to based on the specific goals that they set with their instructional coach and based on their data for progress monitoring and others.
Have you registered your teachers for the NCTM conference yet? Or applied for the STEM Action Grant?
I am so glad someone asked that question. Because just this morning, we got rates and dates for it. And so what I'm going to say is I'm going to have a ton of flyers over here for you to take and give to all your friends and to all your people. But also that March 29th is the last day to submit an application to the STEM Action Center. And literally less than 30 minutes to write a grant asking for your teachers. Groups of 5 or more have a discounted rate, all that other good stuff. But I will also ask Jonathan to please forward the rates and dates information that is coming out. Literally, they just sent out the rates today. So in a month or so, I will send out another email so that you can go ahead and so that we can make sure that we get things done at the early bird. Thanks, whoever asked that question.
I apologize, I'm not going to get through all the questions. The ones that are left, let me just kind of tell you, there's still questions out there that are about support for high school math for English learners. Some questions about what we're doing to support students to pass the WIDA assessment. Some questions about the legislative session, which I hope were answered once Jeff was talking, so we won't do those. And then there's some assessment questions. So if your question was about the full implementation of formative assessments for next year or school report cards, I'm going to recommend that you address those to Darren Nielsen because he'll be able to answer those questions. And so I apologize for not being able to get through all of those. But it is noon, and it is time now for you to return to your regularly scheduled duties, I guess. And I just want to say thank you for the support that you've given me for the 4 years that I've been the Director of Teaching and Learning. I have really enjoyed working with all of you. I've really enjoyed seeing all the passion that's out there to help students to move things forward, and just recognize how hard you all work, and just thank you so much.
We let them know there won't be an April meeting, so I am taking Diana's spot, and I'll be out of town for the first meeting, so we're not going to have a CD meeting in April, so we'll see you in the fall. In the interim, I'll be reaching out to each of you individually to ask, I have like 5 questions to kind of guide what CD looks like moving forward, take your feedback from your experience here and continue on. For example, we could move it into like a working group situation where there's 3 or 4 working groups, you work on a task, we share out, get feedback from each other. Like EL seems to be an area of need, and so picking around that idea, but there might be lots of other ways to do this work, and so just know I will be reaching out to to each of you for like 15 minutes to ask you a few questions to give some guidance on how we can support you, taking the great work Diana has done and continuing to advance that moving forward. So just know you have a month off, but you will have a conversation with me at some point. All right?